roll call. You guys want to start on that side?
Crystal Gray, ex officio from Planning Board.
Judy Nod.
Mike McKenzie.
Mason Moyer.
Adam Sputlik.
Jacques Chouillon.
Okay. Any, just review of the agenda? Any additions?
Oh, did you say you wanted to add?
Yes, work plan. Under matters for the staff, we'll be adding the work plan. Anything else?
I just want to make sure everyone looks closely under 5D HAB operating procedures and agreements, since that's a big topic of discussion. And it was kind of a short window to add contributions, so if anyone has that, just make sure, try to think of something now. Otherwise, we'll have to deal with it when it comes.
And there will be a couple other staff updates.
Okay, so you have a couple more things.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Judy, you have something to say?
My mom. No.
Okay, and approval of the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, so we will open for public participation on non-agenda items. Okay, and we'll close public participation. And we'll move on to matters from the board. The first one up is public engagement, purpose statement, and decision. Who's taking that? Judy, Adam?
Sorry, 1 second. Actually have to pull that up real quick. Judy, can you remind me real quick? I believe we're going to cover our rationale or why statement under 5D.
Correct. So in the packet, there is that statement you sent out to everybody.
Yes.
And it's just going over that. And we had, as a board, already voted on several parts of it. And it's just to finish up a few remaining things.
Great. So my question being, do we have anything specific public engagement wise that's not going to be covered under affordable housing experience?
Well, under the public engagement, you have, for the agenda item, we have the purpose statement and a decision on it. So,
Gotcha.
and is your purpose statement the why statement?
Yes.
Yes. So that was where my confusion came in, was whether or not we should be addressing that further down or right now, because it can fit within either.
Since it's teed up, how about
Okay.
now?
Perfect. Okay, so just to, I don't know if we can put that up on the computer, Jeff.
Give me just a moment.
Sure.
Do you
And
want me to be able to edit it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's easier.
I can always write down edits and do them after the fact. Okay, so you might remember we came up with this why statement last time. We voted to approve all the separate goals, and I essentially added the small changes that we wanted last time, and this is what we have. A majority of what was removed was tactical level stuff under each goal. And anything that remains is listed as potential since it wasn't officially approved. But what we have right now for sure is the goal stuff. We already voted on that. That's in the books. So going forward, we just want to make sure that this is what we want by taking a final vote on it. And yeah, again, we can discuss tactics at any point and add or remove them as we see fit, but we want to make sure that we have this one essential document to point at when we're talking about the engagement committee and reassessing on a yearly basis whether or not it needs to remain a committee.
Also, we made all the changes that you all suggested, for example, changing the words of whatever we had to support civil discourse.
So this is a fairly long document. Do we want to just take it item by item? And any thoughts or should we vote on each one of them? What would you like to see have happen?
Yeah, so I guess we did a lot of the legwork in terms of wording and stuff already, so taking it section by section, doing a final check and voting on that, I think is totally fine. Again, we already have the goals. Were voted, I believe, 4-1. And so those are sort of written in stone, but anything else that we'd like to remove, we can, or add, we can at this point.
And I'm pretty sure we also, I don't quite recall if we voted on it, but the rationale statement itself, the top 2 paragraphs, I believe we already worked together as a board.
We did, but we can reapprove that right here. I think that's reasonable. So let's just start with the top section above the line. And I think Judy and I are committed to this language, so we'll ask the rest of the board for their input. Eyes aren't that good, Jeff. Everybody ready? Great. Okay, Jacques.
I'm happy with it as it sits. I mean, I could suggest a tweak here or there, but I don't know that it's of consequence, so.
Okay. Mason?
I think I'm in the same spot.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add.
Great. I don't know if we need an official vote or anything. Yeah, Crystal, did you have any input?
No,
You good? Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the next portion that we would look at is under the first goal, and that is just potential strategies. We already talked pretty heavily about this, but I want to reassert that this is okay with everybody. Again, these are sort of more tactical level things we can add or remove as needed, but this is a basic outline so we know what we're working with. Again, just want to specify that we're sort of working with different levels of engagement, so depending upon how big the issue is, how much public input that we're looking for, we would sort of, as a board, decide what level of engagement each specific issue deserves, and then work off of this hierarchy to decide what the engagement committee should be focused on doing and how far they should try to be reaching.
I also want to add the one difference from what was in there last time we discussed it is we have other with the question mark because we realize there may be other things. For example, the flyer would be a new one for this specific one, but we might not do that for any other ones at all. So that's the one new thing is other question mark.
So this process for me brought up a couple of questions that we kind of talked about in our agenda setting meeting regarding the engagement committee, because I think we all agree that this is something that we would be having an ongoing for, year after year. And obviously, people will be shifting and changing, so it brings up a larger discussion around the participation, like we're in Alpine Balsam, but that's got a sunset on it, whereas engagement wouldn't. So having the discussion around how would new members participate in the engagement committee? What if, since we have 3 new people that will be joining the board, what if all 3 of them want to be on the engagement committee? And since we know that no more than 2 people can meet without having to call a formal meeting, things to think about and discuss is, what does that look like? Will we sunset that the roles are up every year and people are nominated for them? Because what if you have multiple people that are interested in the roles or not? And then around these potential strategies, I noticed, we're saying for 2019 engagement. So I'm curious if we're putting into place something that when we get 3 new members, they might want to have different goals for 2019, or since, depending, God forbid, we want you here, but if you're not, then how did they participate in the goal setting? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Just something I was thinking about.
Yeah, and we can, if you want to see some specific language, like we can reassess this at any point or something written specifically on there. So we leave ourselves open to that. I'm totally open to that as well. Again, this was just sort of trying to be the outline for now. I think we're going to get to more of what you're talking about under committee roles under 5D too, so we can maybe make some broader decisions on what a committee is, how often we have to address or make sure that, someone has a chance to be on a committee, that type of stuff. But I'm definitely open to adding whatever language you want here right now too.
Yeah, I was, to use one of Jacques' favorite words, I'm just concerned that
So many.
we consider it while we're talking about the goals, is that potentially, and Jeff, did I see you want to add something?
Well, I'll just point out that the majority of the board could change things at any time, pretty much. Committing you beyond, as long as there's a majority support for it. That said, it is nice to have some predictable paths to work along, so typically a board would, even if it makes a decision shortly before new board members join, the expectation usually is to continue on the path chosen.
Thank you.
Would it work for everyone if we added a statement that said something like, when the board officers are selected each year, standing committee, or the standing engagement committee, I guess this can only be about that, will also redo elections or officers or whatever, committee members?
I mean, that's what I was thinking, that essentially on an annual basis, we would review and re-engage with who the members would be and basically review the goals. And,
Mike?
if there were feelings of change, then we could engage with at that point.
Yeah, sounds,
It strikes me that to Jeff's point, you can modify that at any time with a vote.
Yep.
And if it's working, you would let it work. And if it's not working, you would change it.
well, the only reason why I was bringing it up is like, say we get some people on the board that are shy about saying, I want on this, and so, yeah, that's what I was hoping for, is that maybe at the same time that we're doing all of the officer roles, is that it's something too of checking in and making sure people feel like they can participate.
I think that is what we are going to further discuss on 5D committee rules, but that's the best practice that we kind of are
Maybe we
moving
could
towards.
recognize at council that none of the prospective members would, are you shy?
Right?
Wasn't
Was that a
part of
question we
the,
put on it? You didn't put your new question on the
you shy?
sheet, so I think you,
Can I
strong elbows.
question, did all the pastries get eaten?
There's,
Just one suggestion, and this is how planning board does it. I'm sure other boards do it differently. But what we do is when we have a retreat, then that's when we ask people what their interest is in being a liaison or any of the specific committees. So it's usually, the retreat usually comes a few months after council appoints new members. And that way it gives the new members kind of a framework of what the workflow is like on planning board. And that seems to work for us.
Thank you. So moving forward on the why statement in this first goal, I don't see anything to add, do you?
No. No, the only thing that would strike me that you know, as a board, we have a responsibility and want to, you know, to continue to move forward and to wait and kind of anticipate whatever happens with new board members isn't, I don't want to say they don't matter, but they don't.
Don't?
In a sense. Because they're not here yet.
Right.
And when they get here, we'd be glad to welcome that and make whatever changes they'd like to do.
Thank you. Sharon? Jeff?
Oh,
Okay. Adam?
Okay, so are we good on this one? Anyone have any other
think it's
changes?
great.
Great. Thank you. Going on to the second goal. Just give everyone a quick second to read that. And again, we've already voted on the goal, but keeping the potential strategies here is what we're seeking agreement on right now. And we talked about this since the very beginning of our board. I think it's one of the very first things that we've talked about and discussed is finding new forms of public hearings or debate or paneling. And the small outreach meetings seem to be pretty well-liked in our last meeting as well. So
It's awesome.
any,
Comments? I'm good.
Michael, good?
I'm good.
Great, thank you. And moving on to the third goal. So this one probably is the area that still needs the most input at this point, or if we don't have any, then we'll have to figure that out as time goes on. So we want to make sure that we're displaying what we've done and making sure we're on track as a board with meeting the sort of idea of good public engagement that we're trying to encompass here. So currently, this is all we have as far as measurements, website visits, YouTube views, public testimonies, and that's the number of public testimonies that we have. But on the table still, we don't have any specific plans for this, but we think these are probably good strategies is get a survey via newsletter, send a survey out during the public hearings, especially the ones where we have a lot of people interested. And again, sort of community meetings with HAB board members. So what I'd ask right in this moment is, does anyone have any better baseline measurement things that they would like to see aside from these that I have listed here? Again, this is a tough one, especially since we're only a year into this, and we don't exactly know. I guess what makes an engagement committee successful is the question we should be answering.
What strikes me when people are, we have two people here right now, that people in attendance at the board meetings are
Seats in the, butts in the seats.
of that active engagement, of achieving that, which is, it would seem like it would be a worthwhile goal, but maybe I haven't thought it through.
I would add that it would be kind of interesting to see if we could put something on Be Heard Boulder about literally asking for feedback. Maybe a series of like 5 questions.
So a survey?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that we, could start out every year, or even once a quarter, change what those are at or goals or something. I don't know. I'm not really, it's not thought through, but something along that line would be kind of interesting.
Okay.
yeah. Jacques, do you want to?
I had essentially that same thought, that if we can get on to Be Heard Boulder, some way to collect kind of regular hits of feedback on both the immediate processes that we're in and just the general housing condition, just so that we can actually track people's engagement.
Yeah, one good way that I just thought of this very second was, housing is on the latest community survey, the biggest concern. Maybe tracking that progress over time is a good way to see if we're addressing the issue as strongly as we can. I realize that's more than just the engagement process, but that's probably a good metric to measure.
I was just going to say along those lines too, maybe just breaking that down even into, you said, a certain number of questions, but if we focus those and we're collecting data then on, let's say it's Alpine Balsam, and we broke down just some basic metrics about that project and how the public's perceiving it and what their concerns are, and we just allow that to live, and we can collect that. And I don't know, I'd have to think through it more on the technology end of how that works and how we make sure that we're getting not just repetitive hammers from, one address that's coming at us, but that they're somehow parsed and valuable measurement.
So, thanks. I just wanted to add, as far as counting people who are here in the audience, the engagement committee can easily do that by counting and keeping a record of that. As far as the Be Heard Boulder, it's a great idea. It's dependent on if Be Heard Boulder is interested in that, So we can take your suggestion to try and make it happen, and they'll either say yes or no. And you guys who have, we may ask you to come up with what is it you're wanting to know.
I'm curious if we add in projects like that. It feels like it would get, because they already do a really great job of narrowing down their surveys specifically for their projects. And if we're talking about feedback specifically on HAB and our engagement process, I feel like those 5 questions might be tailored very different. But
Yeah, I kind of think just making a point of looking at each specific project's feedback, it should be something that we're all doing and committed to.
Right.
And then, this was more specific to our performance.
Well, and also to Judy's point about whether or not Be Heard Boulder and Sarah would want to do this, is what's interesting was last year during the application period was there was a lot of discussion around feedback loops, right? So this might be a fantastic way to, if they're open to it, to consider a larger project of a feedback loop on I'm going to say it out loud, maybe boards and commissions and city, so that people can, we can start to get the feedback loop on some of the projects, et cetera, that we're working on. Not just, do you like to see more housing or less housing, but actually, how do you think we're doing, so that you actually have a review, a way to review the engagement that the city's doing, including us as boards and commission.
I was wanting to ask, we added in there surveys at public hearings. And Adam and I talked about that some, but do you guys have any questions about what we're meaning when we say that, or do you?
Conducted qualitative surveys via
Jacques is
newsletter.
shaking his head. Yes, maybe?
Sure, if you want to, feel free.
Well, so in nonprofits that try to get satisfaction of clients or consumers or whatever, they often do at events. Like if we were having a public hearing, what we talked about was sending out, like a little half page to each person with maybe 2 or 3 questions that they can either put their name or remain anonymous, just anonymous. And it's like, what did you want out of this? Did you get it out of, what was your satisfaction level, whatever? And then you can start building a baseline. Like the first year, if you have only 42% who answer felt satisfied, then you want to set your goal as at least trying to get above 50% next time. So it's that sort of thing. It's where we regularly at public hearings would pass something out that the engagement committee would be responsible for doing. It wouldn't be Corey's problem to do it. We would pass it out and collect it at the end. And that's what we meant by that.
I think my only, the public hearings and the community meetings, I was seeing that. I'm just curious about the newsletter process. A newsletter goes out with request for feedback, and what's that feedback loop? In other words, how does that information come back from a newsletter? I'm just curious what that process looks like.
Oh, go ahead.
Sure. So we discussed last time that newsletters we would want on a very specific basis if we ever do set up an email list of any sort. That, again, is another, it's a process within itself that would have to be set up. We don't necessarily have a specific need or interest right now to do that. That was just sort of a potential.
In fact, we can cross that out if you like.
Yeah, we can definitely remove that.
No, I was just curious about the mechanism.
You've all been on the board longer than I have. But what's, so far, do you have a favorite example of engagement? And Crystal, yourself too, on planning board or other boards. And I'll go first. My favorite one was manufactured housing. We had a lot of people. I thought it was dynamic, it was engaging, and very fulfilling. I mean, I thought we were really engaged and respected by the community and our engagement with them. And but that's the best example I could give. And maybe you have others of where we've had more people and engagement.
I actually agree with you, just because that was the most recent one. We haven't had that many big issues come across, to be honest with you, where we would have a lot of people out. My only thing is I still think there's a lot of room for change and growth in that area, because just the simple public process of people coming up here and talking on the podium, that's not super inviting to everyone in general. So I still think we have a lot of work to do in getting different type of feedback.
Well, it seems like our email, I didn't mean to interrupt you, I didn't feel that way, but it seems like there's one, if I went back through the emails that I've received since I've been engaged on the board, there would be what I'd politely call oversampling from one person. That's not bad, but if we had, 100 people or 1,000 people emailing, and emailing, sometimes people, it can be a little anonymous or a little easier for people to do rather than standing up in front of a microphone. Because a lot of people, I think it's a great point, they're unwilling or unable, or for a variety of respectable reasons, not to engage that way, and would choose not to.
So what I'm hearing you say is that these potential strategies are just that, potential strategies and possibilities to achieve each one of these goals. And when we had talked in the past about some of the email newsletters and connecting with individuals, there was a lot of drilling down to the details, like who would manage the list and how would we collect and all of that. So I think what I'm hearing is that you want to, in general, get agreement, buy-in from all of us regarding the goals and the potential strategies and the why statement, and we put a rubber stamp on this and we move forward, and as we get into the next project, we start to decide which one of these strategies, which one of these goals, and kind of drill down when we get there.
You're 100% correct.
Okay, so.
I'm certainly on board with, I think you've taken the time to put this together, yourself and Judy as a team, and do that, and I certainly want to support you in that, and you're asking for my support, and it's there. You don't have to fiddle with the wording and the specifics of the tactics or all the rest of the stuff.
Well, one thing I do want to,
Your idea or any of that, we're just behind you.
before we give the final approval here, I do want to include the number of in-person audience members. I think that's an important one to include that we didn't hear as a measurement. And then something, add Be Heard Boulder as a potential place for a survey. So those two I would definitely add. And if we approve that, I'll add that after the fact, but it will already be approved. Yes.
So I don't think we have to take a formal vote, but I think the straw poll or the rubber stamping is saying that we're all feeling good about this, correct? Yeah? Everybody's a thumbs up and we're moving forward.
I just have a question. If we don't formally vote on it, will it still be in the minutes?
Corey?
It'll still be in the minutes?
I'll make note of that.
Okay, thanks.
Great. That's all we were asking for. We can move on.
Fantastic. So public engagement. Now the affordable housing experience.
Judy, do you want to start this one?
Okay, so the things we were thinking of doing were flyers to all the affordable housing residents, and you can there's a list online of all the addresses, so we don't need to have the names, and we can just deliver the flyers in both Spanish and English. And letter to the editor, which we want your feedback on. A very brief letter to council. Jeff gave really helpful input on that. And then just a little thing to try and get in the newspaper under the what's going on sort of section. And then as a separate issue, what our idea is that we want to get approval from of what we want to do at the meeting. So, so Mason, how do you suggest you want to do it and do the media stuff first?
That seems probably appropriate. Anybody else have a way that they desire to tackle it? Okay. Yes, Judy.
Okay, so I'll do the ones that seem to be easier first. How about the really short one that just sort of the who, what, when, where, to try and get just the very simple one that says the Boulder Housing Advisory Board invites affordable housing residents, affordable housing providers, and the general public to participate in a public hearing about the affordable housing experience, 6:00 p.m. on April 24th at the municipal building at 1717 Broadway, period.
And where would that one be utilized?
That would be, we're going to try and get that in the Boulder Daily Camera or even Boulder Weekly, just in their coming events sort of section that they have.
Any comments?
Something I want to add is Zach, who's our, what?
Education director.
Oh, Zach, who is our tech person, comes back to work after parental leave on March 11th, and we don't want to bother him the first few days, but right after that, we'll see if we can get a meeting with him to talk about being on Nextdoor. Otherwise, we can try something ourselves, and what else the city might be able to do. But the next thing would be, I guess, the letter.
Yeah, let's take this one at a time.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yep. So, Mike.
Well, I had a thought.
Go.
Jeff, do we have in our budget anything to maybe, to drive a little traffic for something like that? For example, to give, win a free month's rent for the affordable housing. Is that a reach? And I'm really serious when I say that.
I know, but I was watching his face.
And I realize it may not work for all, variety of reasons, but to drive traffic and introduce engagement and provide a meaningful economic incentive that would have a profound impact for a group like that.
I think that could be fabulous, like free dinner at such and such place or something.
Something that worked with when we were up at Ponderosa was a $500, a $250, and a $100 gift certificate to a grocery store too was also very valuable.
I do not know what constraints there might be on offering incentives using, the support budget for HAB. We can look into it.
I'm sorry, Mason, is it okay?
Yes.
When I was working on a television show for the city and Patrick Von Kaiserling was already in place, we were able to we were changing the name of the program from Senior Spotlight, and we had a contest where we offered a free dinner to the winner of the person who came up with the best new name, which became 50 Up. And we never heard that wasn't okay with the city. But that'd be great to find out something and what budget we could go for and offer that. We could do a lottery here.
Or would we be out of bounds to even seek something as an in-kind donation from someone like Boulder Housing Partners or another someone? It could be a partner or something like that,
That would be great.
Doesn't conflict with any of our bylaws.
Great idea.
Hey, Mike, is your mic on?
Yes.
Okay. Is everybody's mics on?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Thank you. Try to speak into them if you can. Having a hard time hearing you guys.
It was off. You're right.
That's better. Now I can hear you.
So we can check into that as well.
That would be amazing.
So cool. We like money.
Is that like a pragmatic checking in, or is that like a frictional kind of checking in to think
That's
about.
I don't know the rules. I'll check with the people who do and see what the possibilities are.
Okay.
Pragmatic information seeking.
Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, how disruptive is it?
Okay, so let's go back to the wording on this. Any comments on this? And again, this is for the Daily Camera or the Boulder Weekly?
Specifically, the event calendar portion.
Yep.
And obviously, if we do get to do something like that, we would change the wording of everything.
Yes,
To
to include.
include.
Anybody?
I'm good.
Good? I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the flyer next. This would be, we would reduce the size that you're seeing it now so that it would be just half a page. And Corey was kind enough to translate it into Spanish as well. And we would just put these on each door. You can't put them in mailboxes because that's not legal, but you can put them at each door.
So I'm curious how many properties we're talking about and who's doing this?
I'm doing it, I'm paying for it, and so it wouldn't cost anything, and it's a lot.
What's a lot? And you're talking about all the affordable units in Boulder?
That I can find addresses for and get to, and if I can find out, I don't know the affordable owners, if I can get their addresses or not, but if I could, I would. I don't know, how many affordable housing units are there, 1,300? I can't quite remember.
3,600 at this point,
Okay, I might
3,500
not get to all of them.
change.
But
Yeah.
I can get to, I guess the list I got was Boulder Housing Partners list, so I could at least get to that. And it's not as awful as it sounds, because it's, I don't know if you guys have done leafleting for political things before, but you just do. You know, they're all next to each other, so you just do it.
Jacques?
I was just going to ask Jeff, do you know if BHP has any sort of a regular communication with affordable housing residents that we could potentially piggyback on?
I believe that they do, but I don't know the frequency or the method of delivery.
Just thought maybe we
If
look
this
into
were
that.
an email list, it would be substantially easier.
Right, but I don't know if we can have access to that. I'm pretty sure we can't,
Gotcha.
that. So,
What do you mean you're pretty sure that we can't? Have we checked with them if they would include a blurb from us?
no, that would definitely be a first step I'd much rather do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like we'd want to reach out to all of our housing partners and see who would be willing to, who has a monthly newsletter or something along those lines, and if they'd be willing to include this as part of their reach.
Or email, yeah,
Yeah, this is a worst-case scenario.
yeah.
Jeff? Isn't it great that I just know? You don't even have to raise your hand. It's just like, I sense you.
I think the best, what I would recommend is meeting with the communication staff here to figure out what messages you want to deliver, which you're already working on tonight. And they might evolve a little bit depending on how your discussion goes. And then think through with some of the communication staff what the best vehicles are for delivering those messages, and to what extent whether or not the city staff can help with that is a different question. We can certainly help think through a plan to help generate, to let people know and hopefully generate some interest in participating in this. That's certainly within our role. And we would potentially be able to help with some of this. So I would just ask you to keep that in mind, and we don't have to wait for Zach to be back. There are other communication staff we can meet with if you'd like to do it before he's available.
Great.
Should we consider including what I guess people would call homeless people in this? Because there's nothing more affordable than outside. And are they a group we should include in that?
I think in this particular instance, probably not, but I think that should be a very high priority another project that we get to, because we haven't had the opportunity to address that in any way, and
Yeah.
I think that's super important. So I'm just thinking of the size of the scope of this one already.
Right. Your call, I mean, really, it's kind of your committee, and we're
Believe me, there's nothing I'd like to do more than address some of those questions too, but I think that's just a little bit too broad.
Maybe proposing in the new year too, what we could do is set aside on our agenda, maybe after matters from the board or something like that, where every time, unless our schedules start to get really full, a half hour where we can invite in maybe some particular people around a topic. So if we say homeless or houseless individuals, and we invite several community members who are activists in this area to come and participate and speak about it as a way to engage and inform.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
If we have it. So maybe at our next agenda meeting, Jeff, what we could do is talk about how some of those could be worked into the work plan as a potential way that we're reaching out under specific topics for individuals who are expertise or activists in those areas.
I just like to add, I think that's an outstanding idea, and I hope that the agenda committee gets that on for us to make plans for, because to do something every month, the engagement committee could certainly do something to get that word out to that particular population. I think it's a great idea.
I'm sorry, Crystal.
Yeah, just another thought is, I know that most of the housing providers have resident councils, but they're the traditional ones, like Boulder Housing Partners, Thistles, et cetera. And manufactured housing, there is a residents group outside of the more formal groups that are inside the different parks that are often managed by the owners of the park. But I think the harder to get to group are going to be the first group that came here that talked about the unbundled parking requirements and what it meant to them when the fees rose for, getting an additional parking place or the other fees that they highlighted. So I think that's going to be the harder group to get, quite frankly. And I do like Jeff's idea of working with the city communication staff just right up front and, show them what your goals are and what you hope to achieve at this meeting, and let them come up with, help develop a plan. I just want to mention that when I think it was Mason or one of you asked about what was a good process you saw for something for outreach, and I thought the Boulder Valley Comp Plan was just excellent. And it drew a whole lot of people in. Now, I'm not suggesting a big old 5-year-long process, but the reason it was so good is it had an educational component, but then you could also start to see people's suggestions reflected in the policy. So in the policy work of planning board and city council and staff. So I just wanted to throw that in, because how do you measure if your outreach is successful? And when we came for the final adoption of the comp plan, I don't think anybody came and said, don't do this. They said, thank you for including this. So to me, that was successful.
Great. I just want to make sure we're definitely not saying that we don't plan on utilizing staff. We absolutely will be. We just realized that they have restrictions as to their time, so we're just saying what we're willing to do if we don't get a full, comprehensive plan with staff.
And so what I wanted to add was, it seems like the steps would then be to approve all the documents that we've brought before you, or change them however you want or whatever, knowing that if we can do giveaway, some sort of giveaway to somebody in a lottery, and that will be added. So we would do that first. You would find out if we can do the giveaway first, so we'd know that, and then we would contact communication staff through you, right? Does that sound like the steps? So yeah, if we can get back to this, to the flyer, which would be a flyer as a last resort, or it could be if we could get the providers, the affordable housing providers to disseminate it for us. So how about that wording, the wording we have for this?
Any objections?
Nope.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, so the next one would be the newest version that I sent out yesterday, I guess. Do you have that, of the letter to the editor that I just sent out? I think it was yesterday, of both the letter to the editor and then a suggested letter to council. And I just made a few changes in that based on some of Jeff's suggestions. And Jeff may want to add some more.
Which one was it, Judy? This one, draft 3?
Tried to get some too.
Not
No,
well, the council
that's not it.
one, and then there's another one.
Yeah,
And I sent them together, I think.
yeah.
No, it was after that.
Nope, I'm not finding it for some reason.
Are we talking the letter to the editor?
Yeah, so when I emailed to everyone, yeah.
Yeah.
Packet?
It is in the packet.
But I sent a new one out yesterday.
Oh.
But we can put the one on the packet up, and I can go over what the changes were. Jeff thought a few things should be added.
Did I
Unless,
get a copy?
I put it out through HAB. Maybe it didn't go
Yeah, I
out.
saw it today.
You saw it?
I
Okay.
did.
So Mike saw it.
Yes.
does somebody have it? They could email it to me right now?
Yep.
Oh, here we go. This has to be it. Let me forward it to you. Jeff.
Okay.
Draft 4?
Draft 4.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
sorry, yes.
Draft 436.
Really, I know. So that's one of them, yeah. Well, that's one of them. There were two different things. We might as well do the council one first, because that's up.
Great.
So Jeff had suggested that we do something as brief as possible, and that was as brief as I could get, but you know me, so you can make it as brief as you want.
When you say April HAB meeting in that prior paragraph, I don't know if you can scroll back up, Jeff, I think it was in the first paragraph.
2018.
Does that mean 2018?
Was that April already?
Yeah, about our April.
This references the upcoming April
upcoming,
meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it just wasn't clear to me reading it cold that it was upcoming versus the past. So I think if you were comfortable adding 2019
Gotcha.
April meeting, then it would be clear that this is to happen in the future,
Okay.
rather than something that
Great.
we were accounting for that happened in the past.
Yep.
And kind of the same, you want to say the summer of 2018?
Yep.
Okay.
Clarify that one too.
And Mason, I hope you saw this when I emailed it, because your name is signed from you, because Jeff thought it should come from the board. Normally, they come from the board chair.
The sentence that begins, "After months of consideration, HAB is," would it soften that just, I mean, is a pretty declarative statement to say intends to?
Has decided to.
Hopes to,
Intends to hold, sounds fine to
I mean, we're doing it, though.
you're doing it.
Doing it, I mean, irrespective of, because I don't know in the letter if we're just informing them or if there's kind of a little ask for endorsement, I suppose we're not
Gotcha.
really. And if we're not, then we're not, then this is what we're doing.
Current plans.
I like the way you say that, because it doesn't imply that we're asking for their permission, but it does soften that.
With my name on it, it sounds like,
Yeah, you don't want to say like, well, like it or not, here's what we're doing.
right.
Mindful of the prior discourse.
And the
I don't want
intent,
to toy with your letter too much. I
no,
didn't
no,
mean that.
no.
Yeah, what's,
The intention of this is for it to go out a little bit, a very short time before we start doing our regular publicity.
and I might be lost, but what's the last sentence for?
So, just to remind everyone, for this, it all sort of came from is affordable housing really affordable? In this case, we don't have anything that we would specifically suggest to council. This was going to be, if we decide that a survey is important, an exit survey for affordable housing residents, that would go directly to staff. That would not be a thing that council could decide on. We could make that same recommendation to council, but this isn't supposed to be for council. Am I capturing that correctly throughout our discussions?
Well, I don't know that it is clear. I mean, you're not planning to take what you hear and make a recommendation, but you're not ruling that out either, I thought.
Yeah.
Kind of depends on what you hear and what you decide to do with it.
So I guess my only example I have is we were going to make a recommendation that we extend the length of notice for rent increases, but you already did that.
Right.
But that recommendation would have gone to the city manager, not to.
Correct. You can make recommendations to staff, the city manager, or
Yes.
the city council. And I think our discussion was that possibly the input you would receive and the thinking and discussion you would have might prompt you to propose work items in your twice yearly letters to council, but that probably going to a recommendation without having their approval of you working on it wasn't what you wanted to imply.
So there it is. That was what I was trying to get at.
Well, what happens if we have a work plan suggestion that comes out of this? And we just said we wouldn't be making any recommendations?
I could be wrong, but I thought we discussed this at length at other meetings, that with the council's interest in our sticking to the work plan right now, and with the sort of recommendations that had been coming out of all our discussions on it, that all the things we were contemplating were to go to the city manager if at all, if we vote on doing anything at all, and that we weren't going to do, and that part of the reason for writing this letter is that council could go, okay, fine, I don't care. We don't have to deal with it.
So if you aren't comfortable with the city council part, we can just put a period at the end of city manager.
Well, as far as my name goes on it, I think it should always come from HAB. HAB is a board in the whole. And this might be one of the discussions we get to further down, is that if we're going to send out a communication, we have to decide, does it come from all of us? Do we want to just go with a majority vote on something, and that's good enough for us? Or do we only send out stuff where we all agree to it? But that's, again, a later discussion. But me personally, I would rather see something come from the board and not just the chair.
I think this is a consequence of me saying, and the discussion we had, that somebody has to send it.
Yeah.
And typically, it's the board chair on behalf of the board as a whole. I think what you're referencing is more of a procedural question as to, if we say it's coming from the board as a whole, what does that actually mean? Is it unanimous? Is it majority? Is it supermajority?
Why wouldn't we just list each name on it?
Because, I mean, for me, I wouldn't be sending a letter, to me, I wouldn't be sending a letter to council because I would want our letters to be poignant and impactful and that it's, by the time we do decide to send somebody, we're not saying we may or may not make a recommendation. And if we've already agreed to our annual letter and then another letter in 6 months and then this, and then, at what point is it over communicating?
You could add strength to the end, and I agree with you, your point. I mean, it's a point really well taken, to say, by the order of the Housing Advisory Board, and sign all their names, or by the order of the Housing Advisory Board, under unanimous consent or unanimous vote, or with unanimity.
But are you saying you don't want to send this letter at all?
I support you guys in the engagement committee, and if you sat up here and said it's something you really want, it's not like I'd oppose it, but to have my name and have it coming from the chair and me alone, that feels like I put my stamp on it and I'm really pushing or moving this forward, and I don't know that I feel that strongly about it to do it. So does that make sense?
Totally. And I don't think it should just come from you.
And someone reading that letter 6 months from now, cold, and picked it up, they would think, well, this just came from the chair, not from the unanimity of the board.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it should come from the whole board and not just from you. The other piece that I might suggest in this is that closing statement. I almost feel like it would be more valuable to express what we're trying to accomplish through this in some manner, saying maybe recommendations or to the city manager or to council is a potential outcome. But I think what would be even more valuable than that in that last statement is to say, what are we trying to accomplish by having this meeting?
Yeah.
In other words, what are we hoping to find out, and what relief may we be trying to provide to the affordable housing community in doing this outreach? So in some ways, I almost feel like that last piece could
Land it.
I feel like it's not necessary to say whether we're going to make a recommendation for work plan in 2020 or not. I don't think that is necessary in this letter. What I feel is important is to express our purpose in doing this. We've kind of given the lead up what's happened in the past, but we haven't said, so we're having this meeting in order to try to provide relief in these areas or to these concerns.
I can't see beyond.
I know.
that. So I'm like, Judy's over here like.
And I'm cutting out Crystal, and the table's just not curved quite enough, I guess. So I like the idea of having a final sentence that sums up our intentions. The whole reason why I think it's important to write the letter at all is so that when council sees or hears about our publicity for the event, they don't go, oh no, we just told them to stick to the work plan and they're doing something, they're going to try and bring something to us, and that's not what we're doing. I want them to know this is something that's gone on for 8 months, that was brought to us by the public. It's a public engagement issue for which we should be responsible, and that any recommendations we make at this time will be going to the city manager, not them. So to me, that sentence is very important. I do like the idea of a follow-up, and I don't care at all if it's for Mason or the whole board. It's all fine with, that's all fine.
So I'd like to piggyback. I would like to see the last sentence removed and our purpose state, a purpose for the event, not intention, because I feel like that's slightly different, an intention versus a purpose. And I think through, if possible, Judy, I think it's possible to be clear in the purpose that we're wrapping up a project, not starting something new, and not putting something new on a work plan. So if our purpose is we're coming to a conclusion on something that started in 2018, and again, some type of tightness on that, I feel like we can accomplish what you're talking about. And I vote for removing that piece of it as well, landing with something and having it come from the board.
Just trying to think through wordsmithing this.
Just a quick question. Just a quick question, schedule-wise, do we need to have this knocked out tonight?
Great point. Can it be something that we work on or make a couple of suggestions for the last line? And since we've got to meet with the communications person anyway and figure out incentives, so it's something that we could work on?
Well, yes, but we only have one more meeting to decide it. But if somebody wants to come up with a way of doing it beforehand, I get mixed up on, not wanting to cross any boundaries of more than one person working on it or whatever. But yeah, I'm not opposed to waiting.
Maybe those of us who have a sense that we might redraft that final statement could
Yes,
that
we could.
in the pot.
We nominate we.
That's you and me. Since we're the ones who had concerns.
Sounds good.
But we could get something to you, and, we could just feed it out to everybody, and they could send comments back, through.
Yes, Jeff?
Yeah, so it seems we need to establish a standard practice for that kind of soliciting input, and the best way of doing that would be for someone to put something out and all comments go to Corey. And then if they are easily reconcilable, we can do that. If they are not, you can't engage in a dialogue over email about substantive issues. So we'll have to make a call as to whether it is necessary to come back to a public meeting or not. But if someone puts out a draft and everyone says that's fine, or here's a typo, or please change that word, you get something completed that way.
Could we also say that if we put out something to the group, changes were submitted to you before our agenda meeting, that we could final approval if everybody agrees, instead of a substantive conversation, that we would agree at the agenda meeting to rubber stamp whatever would need to go into the packet for final approval or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that is, if the board is willing to delegate that responsibility and authority to any subgroup or the agenda committee, they can certainly do that.
How do you guys feel about that? So what we're suggesting, just to recap, is that, and I'll use, for example, this situation, but we're talking about the protocol in general, that Jacques and I would draft the last line, put it out to the group. You could send your changes to Corey, and if there was any real conflict or of anything of substance, then at the agenda meeting, Adam and I, or whoever would be chair and co-chair, vice chair, would be able to work out the last gist of it.
A very straightforward process that conforms to the protocols. That makes sense. Would it be helpful to make a motion and vote and adopt that, so we could just move forward?
Anybody else?
Crystal has something.
Yeah, Jeff, correct me, but, I'm so used to working in the planning sphere. that usually and the city council, but usually at agenda committees, there's no decisions made. It's, is it ready for prime time? I mean, that's the number one decision, but it's not set up agenda committees to be a committee that will make substantive decisions. So I just.
Is it possible to, for us to run differently, or do we have to adhere to what other boards have done?
Well, certainly, a subset of the board in a non-publicly noticed meeting cannot take substantive action. The question, as I see it, is approval of a communication on behalf of the board a substantive action, and I don't
And are two
know.
people considered that? Because we would just be the two, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. So for me, the nut of the matter is, does reconciling some edits to, on a communication that has been generally approved according to a plan that the board as a whole has approved, does that rise to the level of needing to occur in a public meeting? I think that's what, Crystal, you were referring to, is that
Right.
a subset of the board can't take meaningful action on behalf of the board. You can't delegate to two of your members the authority to make a recommendation to council
Right, got it.
or city manager, for
So
that matter.
trying to
And
decide whether or not this is substantive enough to cross that line.
That's right, and we would always err on the side of doing things in full public view. I'll ask Erin, the attorney who makes the rulings on these things for you, what she thinks about this procedure.
Okay, thank you, and let us know. So we've got two different issues here going on right now, then we need an answer on this line and moving forward, and then we also are talking about overall protocol for how we could handle these in the future with our month-long meetings versus our bi-weeklies. So let's take part one. Our option is that we wordsmith and adopt something right now, or you would, I guess, agree or trust that Jacques and I could come up with something
So,
with minor changes being sent to Corey.
What
I'm,
about if we take a break? I'm sorry, Judy, go ahead. I was going to suggest, why don't you take a break? Why don't you go, would you feel comfortable, would that be too much stress if we took a 10-minute break? You went and did it, and then we went back and looked at it. And we get it done.
Go ahead, Jacques.
I think that's a possibility. I think I'd feel too much pressure. But
Performing on the
But
moment.
I was going to say, maybe that we've kind of done this in the past, and maybe kind of the best move is that we actually put together a draft committee real quick. Now, we talked about Mason and I, but from a certain perspective, I think that that base committee would maybe be better served to be, let's say, Judy and myself, or Judy and Mason, or Adam, someone from this committee who's already put this together, and then one of us that has the concern that we've had about how it's crafted, we can work something out between the two of us that we think fits that middle ground, and then we could present that across to everybody. I think there's a better chance that we'll hit something that the other three on the board can then be like, okay, we've kind of,
And then we won't have to do any.
and we won't have to
Any
do
extra.
that extra, right?
Can I, so are you just talking about that last sentence? That's it? Okay, why don't you just take some input right now? And, because, I mean, quite frankly.
Well, we're also
nice-
talking about protocol overall, how we want to handle this as a board in the future. So
Yeah.
yes, it's the two issues.
It just seems like it's a lot of time over the last sentence, and, you know, maybe people can give input publicly where they are on it, what, if there's any great suggestions. I mean, I'm going to just start and say, even though I'm non-voting and I'm kind of
Yeah.
stepping out of my area, but we will keep you informed of the input we received. That's the Boulder Housing Advisory Board. I mean, I'm sure you guys have good ideas, but
all we don't want to do is piss them off. Like, that's what we're really going for. So that's the needle I'm trying to thread right now.
Right. You don't want to say it's an election year, you might want to buckle up, it's about to get interesting.
Yeah.
That would be wrong.
I would just like for a second to go back about where the genesis of this whole letter came from. And people were asking about the letter to the editor and what my concern was. And I said, my concern was that council doesn't know, and I don't want them to be surprised, and I don't want them to be agitated when they find out we're doing this. So my interest in the whole letter is, do we do that? And right now, I felt like the last sentence might have done that. But that's what I'm interested in, like whatever goes for that. And, you know, that it's like, we're not asking council to put this on their work plan in any way, shape, or
Right.
form.
And I think what Jacques and I are saying is that we hear you. We understand what you're saying, that you, like Adam said, you don't want to piss off council, and we understand that. And we will keep you informed of the input received is not a purpose statement. It's not, and what Jacques and I were talking about is the purpose of this meeting is this, and then that way it doesn't, and the purpose of this meeting is to wrap up the following project to the end of it. So it hits on letting council know that we're wrapping something up, not starting something new.
So can we just take a straw vote? Is like, are the majority of people here, are there 3 people that are unhappy, that don't want, I don't say unhappy.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
Are there
not
3
happier.
people that don't want it, that want the last sentence changed? Are there 3 people that want the last change from HAB may make 1 or more modest recommendations to city manager, but will not be making any recommendations to council? Are there 3?
Well, I think what you're asking then is will it be voted, will we approve it as it is?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. It's like, do we want to
Yeah.
spend all that time?
If I put myself in the role of counsel, I would be provoked by the last sentence, without any doubt. It'd be like, what are you talking to the city manager for?
Yep.
Nobody asked you to do that. I think you want, it strikes me from our discussion, you want to make a couple points.
Yeah.
Yep.
That we are already doing this, we've already agreed to do this.
Yep.
We've already agreed that it's in concert with everyone else, and by the way, this is what we're doing. That's it.
Yep, purpose
It's really
statement.
that straightforward.
Yeah.
That's why it strikes me we could just probably do that at a break and maybe be done with it.
And
As
so-
long as you're not offended that we're writing on your
No.
your.
What was your suggestion then?
Well, I mean, I'm in agreement with exactly what Mike said. I just found the last sentence awkward,
Okay.
and I wouldn't put it in. Put in something else.
And I would say, I mean, Judy, I'm absolutely on board with the heads up aspect of this. I think that is important for where we stand now. And maybe I'm leaning towards your suggestion, like that we just go, when we take a break, we'll sit down and we'll crank something out. But I want to make sure that I feel like we haven't wrapped up the intention of this.
Okay.
And I'd like to just wrap up the intention. And simultaneously, for me, I'm a little less concerned about council's take on. I feel like the last sentence is a little provocative as it sits. So I'd like to soften it in a sense from that sense, but I also don't want to limit us from saying, you know what, if something important comes out of this and we want to put this on work plan next year, we're going to put it on work plan next year. And I don't want to suggest that we're not going to do that if we find something valuable and something that can get chewed on.
Great.
So
Thanks.
that's kind of the 2 pieces I'm trying to get in there.
So I'm going to make a motion to table this until after our break.
And who will be working on it?
I will.
Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm good. I understand better what you're all saying, and I go with it. No, that's fine. I don't care if it's the 2 of you. I don't care if it's the 2 of you with Adam.
Yeah, I'll work with you. Okay.
I'm out of pastries then.
I don't think we need to make a motion on it. I think you guys will just work on it, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Great, I just wanted to move on.
Yep. Yeah. 20 minutes.
So then the next one was the letter to the editor.
Yep, and the final one. The final piece.
Right.
For the record, I rescind my motion.
And again, what I think this begs the question of is whether or not we're going to do consensus, full agreement. Is this come from the full board, one person, just the engagement committee? So I think that lens of when we look at this is very different for anybody who's, because you had made in the statement in the last meeting that, yeah, where you said that you would rather not sign.
Oh, I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was like a public one.
This is a public one.
Yeah.
We just have it. It's just Adam and me.
You're right.
Yeah, so I, just for clarity purposes on what you were talking about is what you'd be comfortable to sign on. Are we agreeing that, especially to when we get to 7 people, is that everybody agrees, a majority agrees? How do we want to look through the
Why
lens?
don't you put down the 3 anonymous people?
Right.
Sign them up.
So,
Ron.
so we're making a specific ask on each of these pieces, actually. The one we just covered, that would be, our ask was, since it's going to council, the whole board would be on board with it. For this letter to the editor, this would come specifically just from the HAB Engagement Committee. So we're trying to specify the ask in advance of the board's approval of it.
So then, once officers change, it's who's ever on the engagement committee would be drafting this, and we would be okay as a board,
You would still need full board approval to
full
send it.
board approval.
Well, a majority, sorry.
Okay.
A majority to approve it for us to send it in this form.
Okay.
As with everything, it's a majority rule on this board, so,
Yeah.
yeah. Unless we want to draft a rule that says it has to be unanimous for every piece that we send out to be approved, which we can absolutely do if you want.
It's not me, I'm just saying is that that's a discussion
Yeah.
and making sure that everybody's on board with what we're moving forward on.
Definitely.
What do we do? Could you scroll back up, Jeff, on this piece?
This is the letter to the editor, talking about what we plan on doing with the Affordable Housing Experience public meeting.
Huge improvement, really like how it feels way more open and accessible and engaging.
Is there any concern about the last line, since it is very similar to the last line of the other thing we just talked about?
Yes.
Great.
Would you ever consider in the committee and outreach of, and I don't know, you wrote this between the two of you, right? And has anyone edited this? I mean, outside of the both of you?
No, because, or, sorry, Jeff, yeah.
I have not done text edits. I've provided some comments to help shape it. I think that, Judy, would you say that's how our conversation went? Yeah.
This is a different draft than one that's in the packet.
The reason I say is it seems like
It's a different draft.
Yeah.
not just you, but the entire board would get benefit if you could find access to someone that maybe writes press releases, writes public relations stuff, that just as a community service, people that do that routinely, it's a quick rewrite. I mean, it's 3 to 5 minutes to do that. It's not a big ask for someone, and I think it might add some brevity and clarity to it. And if we took that approach, it might mean that, as we come to a meeting, and if we had a letter like this to sign off on, it might make it a little easier and more fluid to do that. And I hope, and I know there's a risk of offending on that. I've been an editor in the past. I was a former associate editor for the Corporate Public Relations Journal, but I'm reluctant to engage in that because people can be sensitive about being edited, and it, you put a lot into this, and it shows that you put a lot into it.
You wrote most of it.
Right. So, yeah, I'm not offended or sensitive about it at all. But letters to the editor, well, when I worked with nonprofits, the Longmont Times-Call had a workshop for people on how to do publicity for their nonprofits. And the person who led it was actually Quentin Young, who's now the editor for the Boulder Daily Camera. And they talked a lot about who, what, where, when, why is very important in articles maybe, or essays, or some certain sort of things, but letters to the editor are a different sort of animal. And if everyone just put who, what, where, when, why, every nonprofit and agency in town would send their things to the letter to the editor, and you sort of have to make it a story. And I'm not touchy at all about how anyone wants to change the letter. People can say, this isn't working for me, and I'll try a draft and submit it next time. We have time, because we don't want it to go out till the Sunday before the meeting. So that's fine. It's just that in a letter to the editor, you don't want brevity. People don't read letters to the editor for that reason, and they wouldn't get printed if we just said who, what, where, when, why.
See, I don't think I agree with that. I think people typically probably would read 300 to 400 words, and getting read is very important if you write a letter to the editor. And getting read would be helpful to have someone that prepares a document that says, this has a very high probability of getting read in the letter, and moreover being understood and communicated with that. Now, some people will take time and read, lengthy letters to the editor in the New York Times and others, and they can be rather long. Some of the editors screen out some of the wrong stuff. They don't print it because it's just like it doesn't fit with their page content maybe on that day of the paper.
Well, and they do have a word count in this. This is under 300 words. And I'm perfectly delighted if you want to take a shot at writing a letter to the editor. We're happy to have help and want to write a letter to the editor that is, engaging to the public and still gives information. I'm more than happy for you to do it, and the word count is 300.
Yeah, what I would suggest is if you had someone that that you liked and respected, and found someone that value adds as an objective third party. It's a little risky, as a fellow board member, for me to do that rather than finding someone, a colleague, a friend that's kind of trades in that space, if you will, that can be a really quick and effective rewrite. And I know when I write articles for stuff, I go and seek out an editor, and I need that, because if I write unedited, it's kind of like it's like handing in a first draft, if you will, a little bit. And it's risky, and you can make it really, really good with that input from somebody like that.
I'm curious, Jeff, does the communication department, are there any interns or anything like that might be willing to take us on for these kind of these pieces that we have that for engagement?
I will check.
It'd be interesting if we could potentially, because it's different than other boards, and our engagement is more robust than I think some of the other boards, besides projects, like when, transportation's doing their project or something like that. Just curious if ongoing, or it could be even something fun where, we work with a CU class that's working with us for a semester or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, I think the idea is a good one, and I think there's value in it, that we can find a third party. I do think it's valuable that they are also professionals in that realm and engaging with it. So if we can find communications people, and if that's something that would be within their scope and we could make an ask of that, I mean, I suppose that might be the first place to stop and look, both because it's within the city staff kind of group, and it's probably the most evident place. We're not going to a third party outside of staff who might have their own take on something and therefore shifting it. We're just looking for a straight, edit, and as you said, just how to craft it in a way that may present better. So I think it would be a good idea to do some form of that. Yeah. Again, we're kind of getting into the processes piece of this, and a lot of these are questions we have down the road.
Adam, you want to add anything?
No, just looking for what our next step should be.
Interesting question, because we know we have a rework on that last sentence. So,
I assume the same can apply to the last sentence in both.
well, it seems to me the last letter was more of a purpose wrap-up statement of a process that took a year, whereas this is an invitation into also including a new way of engagement. Does that make sense? But Jeff, do you have thoughts? A little help here, Jeff? A little help?
I think you would want to start with agreeing on what you want to accomplish in the meeting. What does success look like? Then your communications flow from that. If success is a lot of people that want to engage on affordable housing questions, that's one thing. If it is we want potential work plan items to be surfaced, that's they're not mutually exclusive, obviously. So it's not entirely clear to me what you want to accomplish by holding this event. And I think that's making your attempts to communicate about it hard. You want to get some people together. You want to have a good conversation. You want to, try out some new things. To what end?
Yep.
So just as a overview, I think it's obvious we want to get as many different experiences from different affordable housing resident renters, owners, and when I say owners, I meant not the owners of the affordable housing units, but we want them to. So every level, every person who interacts with the affordable housing process, we want as many of those experiences as possible. We want them to tell those experiences, both positive and negative, to sort of answer the questions, what is the affordable housing experience like? Are we capturing fully as a community that it is in fact affordable? And what might we suggest to either city manager or council, hopefully not council, for improvements to the process, something like a survey, an exit survey. That's sort of where this all came from. And feel free to correct me if I'm not encapsulating that.
Okay, so you're asking for as much feedback as possible, positive or negative, regarding the, anybody who's in or experiencing affordable housing, and whether or not, I heard you say that whether or not they're affordable. So maybe we need to start with what are the 3 things you want to have answers to, because we hope that developers, providers, and city staff can participate in this process. What's the process? The process being, we just want you to share information. But if we share and collect this information, what's it for? Do you see what I'm saying? I see where he's saying with the end game. And on that note, can we pause for a second? We'll take a break.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Or do you want to keep going? Thoughts?
I'd like to take a break.
Okay. It feels like it's getting fuzzy right now and a little murky, so maybe just a 10-minute break, 7:30 right now. We'll be back at 7:40. Jacques, you and Adam are working on the final sentence, and we'll be back at 7:40. And we took a break for a minute to redraft a last sentence and to continue the discussion on affordable housing experience.
Did you email that? No.
I'm going to email that right now.
Okay. Jeff, you'll have something to put up in just 1 second.
Over the break, did anybody have any additional thoughts or ideas about moving forward?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Why are we doing this? I don't, I just had to kind of back up, and one thought I had was just, if I put myself in the role of an affordable housing developer, whether it's the housing agency, a BHP, or another not-for-profit or a for-profit affordable housing developer, the idea of someone independent who we don't really know, without kind of that direction, or at a minimum, consent of city council contacting the residents, could be deeply not received well. I mean, these are people that, if you put yourself in the role of a developer, they're cashing a check from these residents every month, and they have a certain baseline of whatever their relationship is with those tenants, of how they interact. And they have times, I mean, a big part of that management is managing tenant satisfaction, some of which are reasonable and some of which are really not. You know, tenant expectations of affordable housing, some of which it's not reasonable. You're not, you know, for $1,200 a month or $1,500 a month, you're not going to get granite countertops and, you know, Whirlpool tubs. But people can sometimes ask for that. And so to risk any kind of further disruption and people coming into that, I don't know how that would be received. I don't know quite how to tackle that, or if that's worth the risk, if you will, about that.
Sure. So the impetus for this was,
I would like to add one more thing, too, before we clarify the impetus of it. Because I kind of did something similar, was just step back from it. And sometimes I think we get into a process and we start rolling with that process. And so when we step back and we take a look, yes, we collected all of this information, but as we move forward into 2019, and it appears that what we're trying to do is wrap this up and check a box, right? And I guess the larger question is it necessary, and for what purpose? So if we're not going to get the people to the table, which may be the developers or the partners or stakeholders, because we're not sanctioned by the city or supported by the city to do this, this effort and this organization, is this the best use of our time? Is this the direction that we want to go? Or is this information tabled and we focus on something that is within the purview of our work plan and goals, and we start to collect or put our energy and effort towards that? I guess that's kind of what I paused into. And I don't know that it needs a direct answer, but it's just let's take a breath, pause on it for a second, and see what comes up from that.
so yeah, I have had trouble focusing on what this all came from, what feels like forever ago as well. And the thing that has sort of continued to drive me is twofold. This was the very first question we asked: is the affordable housing program truly affordable, or are we losing people who we're supposed to be taking care of?
Okay, so let's pause on that first question. Is that something that residents could answer, or is that something that we would be collecting data through city, or, do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so then go on to the next one.
And one of our thoughts on that exact question you just asked, how do we gather that data, was to have an exit survey. And that was where the whole, we might have to make a suggestion to staff thing came from, was that might have been a recommendation of ours to staff to ask that all of our affordable housing partners have an exit survey, so we know, because right now we don't know why people are leaving necessarily. If it is in fact when an AMI goes up and the rents go up with that, does that drive people out? We don't actually have that information. Jeff gave us some, I think, from about 60-some% of what we do know, but that isn't a specific, that's just a thing that those partners do on their own accord. It's not mandated by the city, anything like that. That's just willing information that they're giving us. Yeah. So that was one of the main questions. My second point in keeping focus on this is I don't know a whole lot about the affordable housing living experience personally. And I think it's pretty important as this board functions that we hear from that group of people and not just on the negative side when they came to us to tell us, that they can't handle the increases when AMI goes up. And we've already seen a great improvement from that experience with the 30 to 60 day notice for rent increases. So the second part is really just, I want to know more. I want to know more about that experience. We just talked about having some homeless advocates and homeless people here to tell about that experience, because that's another experience I don't know a lot. And wouldn't we have this time that we don't have to be working on the bigger issues, I think it's important that we engage with those aspects of the community we don't know a lot about. So for me, this is still an important process.
So what I hear from you are two things: getting to know the affordable living experience for the individual that's in affordable housing, and the desire to understand why people would exit the program. Okay, so we have two reasons. Judy, do you want to add to a reason?
Sure. I'll approach it from a little bit different perspective. I believe everyone on the board, and Jeff and Corey, agree that we're all interested in affordable housing, and we're all interested in engagement. Like, we see that as really part of what we do. People came to our meetings, as far as I know, unsolicited more than once, with a fair amount of people who had stories about their concerns about rising costs and amenities that may or may not be reflected of a larger group. And again, we don't really know that. I've gotten to know some affordable housing providers who I think they're great. We went on this tour and we saw some great places. And I believe actually the city wants to know if there are some glitches in affordable housing that can be remedied, because the city certainly doesn't want to be building affordable housing that the people who need it most can't afford to live in. So all we're trying to do is just see what's happening out there and give providers a chance, when we get into this later, we'll talk about what we had in mind for the meeting, and we had in mind asking maybe one of the people who led our tour to talk about affordable housing a bit, so they can talk about all the great things that are happening that we can agree with, and also hear from people about their good. There may be people who come and say simply, I am so grateful to have affordable housing. Thank you so much, City of Boulder. I don't know what to expect, but I think it's really worthwhile to find out. And I actually feel it's our obligation, because the people who came to talk to us trusted us as a place where they could go to be heard. And I just think we have an obligation to pursue it.
I have some thoughts, but I'm not quite ready. So if anybody else has anything to add to it. I can kind of start. I was going to pull up the draft that we just threw together and what we changed at the end of it there. I think, I fall on two sides here. I recognize.
Of course you do, Libra.
Of course I do, Libra. It's Boulder. I'm a Libra, everybody, okay? I do recognize your concern, and I do have questions based on the intent of the meeting. And I think there's maybe a little bit, after listening to you just now speaking, I do think that I recognize the concern, and I can see that we don't want this to turn into tit for tat or a back and forth between, tenants and providers, let's say, right? We want to bring in, I think there was a little bit of a feeling to me in the letter, the way that it was drafted, that it was, and we kind of got into this a little bit, like, what is that purpose of pulling it forward? I think this last little line that we put in did soften that somewhat. But even so, hearing Mike's concerns, I feel like there may be good reason to look at the body of it a little bit. But maybe we should just put it up and kind of look at it as it exists now. I value the fact that we started this process, I think, and that would be my, in a sense, my counter, and I do feel like we want to bring closure, and I think it's worth offering another opportunity for people who have put in before, to hear from us what we've found, where we feel that we kind of have landed on it, just get feedback from us. And I do agree, it's slow at the moment, so to speak, in some ways. And I think the opportunity to get in front of the public and hear what they have and their concerns, and hopefully be able to really pull out, as we said here, see if I can pull this thing up real quick. Both the, I mean, as we said, we want to look at the aspects of this program that are working well and that are serving affordable housing residents, and kind of wrap up also things that we see where there's room for improvement, and just to get our feet on the ground a little bit better around what that means. Some of it's the 30, 60-day thing. That was one thing that was right off the bat really clear. We all got into it. But what are we bringing out of this now at the end of the day? And I don't think that we put that down anywhere. So I think that meeting would just be an opportunity for us to get ourselves to that point where we're ready to say, here are the findings in that way. So I think that's kind of the goal of this, in a way, is to say, what are the findings? What have we gotten to after however many months it was since we had that April, or whenever that first meeting was?
Oh, sorry, other way.
Oh, he's got it.
Adam, from your questions about what you'd like to know, and I can't disagree with any of those, one that jumped out to me is, how do we know that affordable housing isn't deplorable housing in the experience of the residents of that? And I don't know that. Some part of the affordability piece, by my observation, is it's driven by the area median income, the AMIs, and it's a metric, a template, if you will, that overlays the fairly standard. Not to say that that's right or it's fair, and then there's some percentage of that that's based on their income, and the rent burdens, where it goes above 30% or certainly approaches 50% for some people, is certainly burdensome, without a doubt. I mean, I think that's undeniable. Have we, in our engagement, gone out to any of if we engaged in all of the various developers to kind of gotten their perspective of those dynamics, or maybe even just among staff? I think, like, for example, Shelley's probably very, very tuned into that, and others in the staff about that.
As far as I know, aside from our tour, not really, no. And this was supposed to be, again, sort of that calling out of all the people involved on every level of affordable housing, including the developers who would be interested in showing their perspective about how affordable housing has become what it is.
Yeah, Judy, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, that sentence I love. I think it's great. I also wanted to remind everyone that we've already had some accomplishments in this effort with all our meetings, because we winnowed it down to 4 areas that we thought we wanted to pursue on our own, and 2 have already been taken care of, because the people in affordable housing, the affordable housing residents spoke to us. Staff did pick up on our interest in changing 30 days notice to 60 days notice, and Right Away has already done that. So that's been accomplished, partly because we were here. And the concerns that people had in Boulder Junction about parking, we did refer that to the Boulder Junction Access District Parking Commission. I know, I got the whole thing. And provided a direct link with the people who had concerns to go talk to them. So we've already accomplished some things already. And, as far as I'm concerned, we can go ahead and talk about this sentence. I think it's great.
So I want your buy-in still as to whether or not this is important enough to move forward with, because I think that is important as a board, that if you see a place for our time that's more worthwhile, I want to have that discussion. Personally, I think this is one that I do want to know more about.
So my buy-in is, I think it's worthwhile. I think there's lots to still be done in this realm. I had a couple thoughts. One is there's a little bit of a break, I think, between the quantifiable data and qualitative data, in a sense, that we'll be collecting if we have this meeting, and just to recognize that this is a qualitative, informational type of situation. And the data that we really want, in some ways, the things you're talking about, like how many people are leaving, those are pieces that aren't going to be accomplished, I don't believe, through this process, right? And we couldn't hope for that. So I just want to kind of say, I think it's valuable. I think we need to recognize that it's qualitative findings that we're kind of looking for and that we're trying to get to. The other piece is, and I think this is to maybe address your concern, Mike, is that it might be something that we want to consider to also reach out to these developers, people that we're supposedly inviting here, but we haven't necessarily reached out to directly in this conversation that we've had. And of course, yes, we have public meetings, but I think it might be worth our while to also put a brief letter to them, a slight variation on this, that just invites them to the process and explains to them more clearly what we're trying to achieve by having them there, so that we get that feedback, because we need it from both sides if this is what we're really looking at doing.
I think in manufactured housing, we had a couple of owners here. I think there were 2 or 3. But if the situation was reversed, if we only went to the developers and didn't go to the residents, that would be sort of like, let's count the money that votes, so to speak, as opposed to the tenants that vote. And it's an important voice to not leave out, as well as the staff, I think, from the city that would seem to be accessible for just a discussion about some of those dynamics to include in that process.
Yeah, our intent was definitely to allow staff, or actually request that staff would give a presentation, a very brief presentation about affordable housing, what's been going on in the community, so everyone has a basis of knowledge before the discussion is open to everyone in the public. Because I don't think we talk about what we've accomplished enough. We're regionally the best city when it comes to affordable housing, and I don't think that gets talked about enough, so.
Is that your understanding too, Jeff, that you'd have a presentation for April 24th?
If that's what you would like to support what you're trying to accomplish, absolutely.
Okay. When I kind of look over the list that both of you have expressed, as far as one question being, how could we better, if there was anything else to serve our time with, we don't have any projects on our work plan at the moment. Affordable living experience is important to understand and to hear more from the residents if they want to participate. I am concerned about both the buy-in from our partners when we're not sanctioned by the city in this motion. I'm also kind of concerned by your statement of the city wants to know about the glitches in affordable housing, because if they wanted to know, I feel like they'd direct us to hold those meetings. So I'm a little concerned about making that assumption that I guess we would know what they want from us in that piece. I do believe we can create a trusted place to be heard for these individuals to come forward. I think it is an incredible opportunity that we have this kind of time available to have people come and speak. I think it'll be even more interesting if we can put some incentives with it and we have a clear, something I was thinking about as well is in the bigger picture of this, though, as we collect this information, you know, I guess just being aware of what we're going to do with it afterwards and how we're going to kind of move and maybe suss it out or see if anything else presents itself. But it's not that I'm opposed to it. And of course, my buy-in is on the affordable housing and especially the experience of it. I just want to make sure that we're understanding what we're moving forward on and being clear on that, because when they all show up here, are we asking questions? Are we sitting at a table? Are we we're going to present some information, and then are we just going to ask them all to share their information and we're just going to sit here and collect it and so just being aware of that portion of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just to give some context, I think it should be pretty similar to the manufactured housing testimony, in my mind, where we have follow-up questions, we'll ask follow-up questions. We're just sussing out information that I think staff would like to know, that I think council would like to know, and we're providing that
But that's
opportunity.
an assumption.
Yeah,
It's an assumption.
that is an assumption. Maybe they don't want to know anything about the affordable housing
I'm just saying
experience.
Yeah,
Is there any reason you couldn't have, just undertake a private conversation with a couple of council members to kind of get a sense of the tone of that? I mean, why? I mean, instead of, a formal letter that you can, to seem like they're pretty accessible and to say that in a way that people will say something orally that they might not want to put in an email or other way, and you can kind of pick up on the tone of that receptiveness for that.
But 2 council members does not make a council.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting trying to take some non-open forum, but why not? In the same way, when people do, I find corporations do communications, they'll go out and they'll test that, and they'll go look to people that are influential in the community as a bellwether and informally say, has this been talked about before? Has been done? Do they have certain beliefs? Do they think it's something to explore or not? And based on that discussion and your interpretation of that discussion, you have a better sense of.
But also the
Of how
flip
you're
side
doing
of that is that as a representative board of the people, sometimes I think we also are getting in front of potentially ideas that council's not aware of. So it's I see both sides of it. Does that make sense? It's just that I think and also a couple of things that you've brought up is that originally I thought what we were doing was wrapping a 1-year plan up and presenting some of our success stories and kind of checking the box on this. But what I'm hearing is that we're potentially also opening up more possibilities. So.
Well, this is just sort of, in my mind, it is the culmination of what we've been doing by hearing the experience. I don't intend to necessarily pick apart every single thing and start acting on each issue. We already put to bed that we can't form an AMI committee because we're not going to be solving AMI. This is, in my mind, just I want to hear the experience. I want to put a line in the sand saying that we did this so that everyone can look back and say, wow, the Housing Advisory Board actually did something to hear the community.
So what happens if somebody comes and shares something or several people come and share something and they want action from us?
Then we say very clearly that we can't necessarily say we're going to do anything actionable in the near future, but at least their information is heard.
I want to add something if I can. I want to remind us all how we even got to the possibility of a public hearing. We winnowed the public input. We got down first to 13 or 14 or 15 items, and then we winnowed it further to 4 items, and we decided those were just, with Jeff's help, those were just for the city manager, not for council. They were items that the city manager, the city staff could or would handle if directed to do so by the city manager, and that in order for us to make a recommendation to the city manager, and there were only two remaining issues, and it was on data to be collected and on doing an exit survey, I think, something, I can't remember exactly, I think those were the two. And it couldn't be done without having a public hearing first. So that's how the public hearing idea started. And we were just going to be doing it about costs of rising rents and rising amenities. But then we decided it would be more positive if we did it on the whole affordable housing experience. And so that's how it's grown to where we are now. And I just wanted to recontextualize that for everyone, like how we got to this place.
And that's absolutely great, and I thank you for contextualizing it. I'm just curious, are we wrapping this up, or are we starting something new? Or are we wrapping a portion and starting a portion?
I just want to look at this as a listening session in my mind.
And is that clear in our letter to the people? It's just a listening session. We're wrapping up a portion, celebrating whatever successes we have.
That's a great question.
I would say that my hope is that although we may want to bring some conclusion to this, in a sense, we're never wrapping anything up.
Right.
So I'm not worried about whether we're wrapping this up. If something arises that needs attention and seems like a valuable place for us to spend our time and energy, then we will decide as a board to spend our time and energy there. And if it doesn't, and I think, this is partially Mike's point maybe, is like, are there better places for us to be spending our time and energy than doing this wrap up in a public manner? That's not something that we've discussed. We've been kind of rolling down the road of this, and Mike's brought that up. I think it's a valid point. So the question is, are we ready to make this decision on this, or are we deciding we want to?
And the key point in there, this is what I was trying to get to, is that if we choose that we're wrapping a portion up and we're also listening and remaining open, then what we are saying is that although our directive was to work only on work plan items, we are remaining open to working on other things. And I think that has to be a conscious decision by all of us at the board that we are choosing to actively continue to work on things that are not on the work plan.
My response to that would be community engagement around affordable housing issues is a part of our mandate. It is what we are supposed to be doing.
Okay.
So, yes.
I also believe that in the city council session where they talked about the different, when we had that study session about HAB and people talked about HAB, I believe at least 5 city council members, because I took notes on it at the time, I don't quite remember, but many city council members, although they clearly wanted us to work on the work plan, they also did not want to stifle our innovative ideas, and they just wanted it under control. And I don't feel this is out of control.
Okay. This is the decision that I wanted to make sure we are clear we are making as we move forward. Adam and Michael, do you want to add anything?
I think Jock said it perfectly. This is always going to be ongoing. I just want to make sure that with this time that we have, that is very valuable, we use that as a way to engage the community, which is a big part of what we're supposed to be doing. And I think this is an excellent way of doing it around a specific group of the community.
Michael?
And could everybody remind me, did council ask us to do this? They didn't ask us to do this. And it seems from the discussion this evening that the engagement has the potential to be somewhat disruptive to different interested parties, if not maybe a little slower, a little more carefully orchestrated. And I don't know if April 24th needs to be a hard date to do that, because we're stepping outside of that directive of council. And so in stepping outside of the council work plan, it would strike me that it would be prudent if the decision was to do that, to go a little slower and maybe get a little engagement from council as well as, because community engagement to me, it strikes me that it engages everyone, not just the certain interested people and certain favorite people, but just, but everyone, but certainly in this case, council, to say that. Because what I heard from the study session was a minority of council were okay with stepping outside of the work plan. And most would like to see HAB, and again, this is just my interpretation, and I could be wrong, been wrong many times today, that they would like to be kind of inside that zone, if you will.
If that's the case, we can just forego the next several meetings then, because we don't have anything that council wants us to work on. So I'm happy to have a few Wednesdays off, but I'd rather spend that time doing something important.
I'm not going to argue that it's not important, but I think the motivation seems to be more urgent, and the engagement of us that, there's an engagement that you've already done a lot of work and you're pretty invested in it. I'm just suggesting that is there some engagement from council to get some perspectives about where that stands. Mindful of Mason's point, that sometimes, you need to think independently and proceed anyway.
Jeff, do you have any input for us on this topic?
Well, it's clear to me that there's not a common understanding of the purpose. I mean, it ranges from what could be a very targeted public hearing about two ideas, as you pointed out, Judy, which may have been the starting point, to a general listening session to learn more about the affordable housing experience, to help basically a professional development kind of opportunity, to, opportunities to try and identify glitches in the system. I mean, there's not a clarity of purpose, which I think is the primary reason there's such a struggle to try and figure this one out. So for me, it would say the discussion should be really, let's figure out what 2 or 3 things do we want to accomplish, and then we can design a meeting and calendar it and communicate about it to accomplish those things, because there's so many different ideas about what could be accomplished that it's challenging.
And I would add what could be accomplished and what's the best way to proceed in it, yeah. Because I see both sides on this, and I don't think it's an either or, and I hear you on the utilizing our time to the best of our ability, and I'm also sensitive about being clear on this, and also how do we proceed with buy-in from all interested parties, because I am concerned about our partners, and if I ran Boulder Housing Partners or Thistle, how would I want to be how would I want to participate in it, or what if? And I mean, if we're stirring the pot, so to say, but I don't feel like it's sanctioned by the city, and I'm not participating in it, how does that go? So there's a portion of me, first and foremost, I absolutely buy in what you're saying, Jacques. I think that it is in the mandate, and I do believe that our public engagement is. So I'm completely bought in on that, and I would like to see our time utilized on all of this. I'm just curious, and kind of what Jeff just said is I think we're struggling on this because we're just not able to say these are the 3 things that we're wanting to accomplish in this, and I think it's fuzzy, and I'm not really sure how to create clarity around it.
How about if we start with each person saying what they perceive it to get out of it, see if that gets any clarity? Would that help at all? Like what each person here thinks would be worthwhile?
I mean, I'm going to go back to, and I don't know, we don't have an agenda structure for what that is looking like, how much time we're giving to this public participation piece. I think there's a huge number of open-ended questions. I would still say that there does seem to be a little bit of a vacuum of work for us moving forward, at least in the immediate. And I'm hoping that maybe Jeff will give us some clarification on that as we get through tonight's meeting a little bit. So there's a part of me that's just going to say, you know, I want to continue having engagement with the public and having the public feel like they can come into meetings and they are invited into meetings for engagement. Whether this is specific personally for me in this instant, whether this is specific to affordable housing issues, which we are trying to kind of, this one is wrapping into that process that we've been going through, or whether it's just more broadly open saying, hey, here we are, we're really trying to bring the public in. I mean, I'd love to hear about all kinds of things. I'd love to hear about Alpine Balsam. I'd like to get feedback on that. I mean, there are plenty of pieces that we could get public participation on. So from that perspective, I'm like, yeah, let's have a meeting, let's get the public, let's do whatever outreach we can to get people to show up. Hi. And from that side, that's where I say, yes, let's do it. I don't have specific questions in my mind around the affordable housing structure that I'm saying, let's try to tease these out and get more clarity on that particularly. So I'm open to hearing what are those things that we're specifically going to try to get
That's a good point.
out of there as well.
You're hitting on something there that I just all of a sudden thought of is like, you know, with the affordable housing issue, when we were talking parking and the bundling of services, we had an issue. Manufactured housing had a direct issue. They were here, they were codified around something, and they were, affordable housing is vast. And you make a great point that we do a public engagement every time, and we would hope or try to figure out how to incentivize that individuals will come all the time and want to talk about their experiences under any of those. But we need to get, if we're going to have it be specifically about affordable housing, it should have 3 specific issues we're trying to drill into. And when you talk about exit plans, well, that's not really something they can do. That would have to be in a partnership meeting. So if we moved that over to some type of a half hour where we're meeting with partnership individuals, that would be on that agenda. But what are the 3 things we want to drill down to specifically in affordable housing that we would incentivize individuals to come for, that we would utilize the gifts that we were kind of talking about? Does that make sense? But then again, you know, and I'm open to it, and I think we have buy-in, not necessarily sure about Michael, that we would be moving forward on an engagement piece that we all, that so far a majority of us, I believe it is in our mandate and is something we want to comfortably move forward on.
Along those lines, it seems to me that, as we've said, there are things that we've already taken off the table. And so, of course, we're always open to public engagement. If somebody walks in, they still have that issue, they want to talk about it, we want to hear about it. But at the same time, in this particular ask that we're making, I think it does behoove us to focus that in, say, so these are the pieces that we found already that we have interest in getting more information from, that we're seeing. Now, obviously, somebody can come in who has a different point and different perspective and wants to bring up something new. That happens. It is always going to happen. But just from, if we're going to do this, I would say we give it more direction, more clarity around what the ask is, as we're saying, come on in and engage with us. We're trying to learn something more specifically, because we've already taken many things off the table. And in some ways, I think this is this piece of saying, well, we're asking you to come in here and talk to us about stuff that we've already decided to take off the table. And does the public know that? Do they know what we've already feel like is not, you know, something that we're going to engage with outside of the ways we've already engaged with it? So I feel like some some definition.
So I feel like if the board agrees to drill down, the issues would be rising costs and amenities, I would suppose. But I would lean a different direction. My opinion is that unsolicited, we had a number of people come in. The majority of their concerns were rising costs of rent and amenities. But I don't know myself, is that representative or is that a small group? Is everyone happy or 2% of people unhappy, whatever? So I'm just interested in open-ended gathering information about the affordable housing experience from developers, providers, managers, owners, affordable resident home owners, and tenants. I'm just gathering information and seeing where that goes.
I would say that if we're trying to do that and gather some quantitative information, then maybe it behooves us to take this, structure something, questionnaire, feedback, get a systematic in place that's going to actually have people answer specific questions about specific things and get us information on those things that we're trying to get information on. So in a way, if we want to try to drive this towards a more quantitative result, we need to give it form. And so the question would be, how are we going to do that? At this point, it seems very open-ended to me. And I don't know if, with the potential risks that have been expressed, if that is the best way to do that.
So I'm going to pause for a second and just say we have a time check of 8:20. We are dramatically behind on our agenda items, which I think is okay because this obviously needs to be worked out, and we should do that. I'm curious. We've got the HAB operating procedures and agreements. What we could consider is dealing with the March meeting plan and then possibly considering bundling the procedure ones until the March or the retreat or something along those lines, since they're not vital, and then hit the work plan and staff updates. Does that feel like something, as we continue this conversation for a bit more, if we agree to maybe give this like 10, 15 more minutes and see where we're at with it, and if we can't come to something that's feeling really solid and good, we decide how to move on from there, and recognizing that there's enough non-clarity that we need more something around this. And maybe this is a fantastic thing to have facilitated at a retreat, because we were talking about what to put under the retreat. So thoughts on that? Tabling the procedures and agreements to a future meeting and giving this about 10 more minutes with some form of next step, new business, looking at our March 20th retreat, and handling work plan and staff updates.
So I have a question. I tried looking in all the old minutes and all the meetings and stuff, and I know that the meetings that we had on the second Wednesday of each month were from 6 to 9, clear, straight out. But I never saw we voted an end time on these meetings, the fourth meeting of each month. And so I'm just curious as well, why don't we just go through it? Go through the agenda as is and try and finish.
You mean with no end time?
Well, I
object to not having an end time. I think we should have enough priority in our approach and preparation to begin and finish on time. And one thing I've seen here, and it's not the first meeting I've been in, where I'm coming to a meeting and I'm not reasonably prepared because I have nothing to prepare with. And so therefore, we're really not prepared to have a meaningful discussion, and therefore we're tabling things and burning time. And this is something that we're here, would like to get behind everyone. I think we have a collegiality that's wonderful, and we've established that. But we're really not prepared to do that because we don't have this clarity of purpose and intent on a relatively straightforward piece, and we want to do it. We really, our heart's there, but it seems like we're not, as far as a common objection, and I could speak out loud for mine, what's council's reaction to that? We're stepping outside, we're kind of going off pista, a little bit here, and that's okay, I get that. But why don't we consider the fact of asking a little bit informally to take someone's temperature to say, is this a little bit off-piste, or are we way out of bounds here? Because it's clear that occupancy would be way out of bounds, but I don't know where this is in terms of calibrating that. And we could do that. I mean, if one of our roles is to go out and listen, why don't we listen? And sometimes we have to listen to things that we don't really like to hear.
How would you suggest proceeding?
I would suggest that, I'd love to support the engagement. I think it's important. I think all the things Adam mentioned and all the reasons about affordable housing are absolutely important. But going about it, maybe it's trying to do it a little bit too fast and getting it lined up so I have all the pieces to do it. If we don't have to have a hard April 24th deadline, then why not consider going a little, not just slower, but really improving the quality and going better to do that? Because we've spent a great deal of time and we haven't really reached a meaningful conclusion, and yet we all want to. We want to support that, but we'd like to do it and mitigate some of the potential conflict and have clarity and intent to do that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I think that I'm in agreement to a certain degree that there's a definition here and a clarity that I don't see in exactly what we're asking. And it's a broad piece. And I think we could, to me, it's a matter of how are we going to structure this meeting? It's not a question for me of whether we should have the meeting or not, or whether we should solicit the input. I'm clear on that one. I don't feel we're far off piste here. So from that perspective, I don't have any questions, but I do just have questions about how we are planning to roll it out. And so the question for me is, what's the format of this going to be? How are we going to structure it? Are we giving specific ask or not? And that's the only concern I have.
How do you want to proceed?
Well, I think if we're going to do it right, as much as there's a discomfort of the tabling of things and not completing them, I would say we probably should put a proposal forward that says we're going to do this with this meeting. These are the questions we're going to be trying to get the public to respond to us on specifically. And it's going to have this much time in that meeting, and this is what we're doing. This is the format. And decide if we want to try to get something more quantitative or if we're just going to go for qualitative feels and get more input.
How do you want to proceed tonight?
As I said, I would make a motion that we table it. We come back with a structured plan for how we're going to roll this meeting out.
Okay. Adam or Judy?
Well, after we discussed the letters, we were going to tell you what our plan was for how we suggest the meeting run, and we haven't done that yet, so I don't know if you want to hear that or not. I'm not in favor of tabling things. That's my personal pet peeve, is that I think we table, and it stops us from moving forward. So I would, maybe Adam can talk about what we had planned to do at the meeting a little bit, and then see how that feels to everyone and use that as a point to continue the discussion.
At this point, I don't even know what we're talking about. So what we've specifically, what the ask is. I don't know what the ask is now. So we haven't agreed on that as a board.
Right.
I don't think we can talk about presentation at this point.
Okay.
My suggestion is we come back to you with very specific things to vote on. You vote for or against them, and we move this forward, or we don't.
Okay, that's fine, but I would like to just present what we'd already decided, because I'm fine to bring that up for a vote and have people vote on that, so we don't have to, what we were going to present to you tonight, and I guess what I am now presenting tonight.
Can we pause for a second? Just a matter of course, because there was some discussion around a motion to table, do we want to pause for a second and see if anybody actually wants to put a motion on the table? to table it, or do we want to move into, what would be proper process there? Can anybody interject at any point and say, I'd like to motion to table this?
Yes, that's how I mean, you aren't operating on a formal request for recognition
Right.
basis, so I would say if someone wants to make that motion, they should just go ahead and try and do it and see if it gets seconded.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion, we table this till March, the discussion of engagement until March 20th.
I second. All in favor?
But, your procedures would typically call for a discussion once a motion is made
Yes,
and
you're right.
seconded.
We're all like, open for discussion? Okay, all in favor? 4 yes, Judy, no. Okay.
I have a question. In tabling it, I'm not sure if it's useful to everyone to have Adam and I be coming up with another proposal, because we've come up, this is one of, I mean, since you are the ones who are not comfortable with it, maybe you guys should come up with a proposal for what the ask is, or what the, I'm happy to have it open-ended and just let people say what they want to say about the experience. I don't want it to be about affordable housing as an issue for the city. I want it to be about the affordable housing experience for constituents and providers. But I don't have a specific ask, so I'm not going to be helpful in coming up with any of what you who are not happy with it want. So maybe there should be a committee of 2 people to do that.
I suppose my feeling on that is this is a suggestion coming from the engagement committee. And I'm essentially in the same boat as you are. I have not been diving into this to say, oh, here's exactly what I'd like to do with it. I think if it was opened up to me, I'd put on the board other things that we could also engage with in that meeting time potentially, that we might find to be, more interesting to me. So I think that, again, I think it's a matter of almost sequence. Like, in a sense, if you had that thing of how you expected to see this run out, I think it would have been good to get into that and have that on our plate to see what that looked like and exactly what we were proposing doing. So I don't know that, I don't know that I'm going to be able to write anything for this as far as a proposal to do it. And I don't know that anybody else is either, so. I feel like it's left to you guys to bring that back to us, to the engagement committee to do that.
I see coming up with very specific motions. We either vote yes on them or we don't. That's where we're at this point. It's the only way it's going to move forward.
I understand, but is it possible that we come up with the same motions that we would have brought
Yep,
up tonight?
absolutely.
Yes, okay, got it. Okay.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to new business, March 20th meeting. And I know we put this on the agenda, Jeff, but can you help me remember what we were needing to discuss on the 20th?
So the discussion we had at the agenda committee was to take, to begin with the community survey results. There's a presentation and discussion opportunity there, which I think, Adam, you referenced tonight, and I think you've all had a chance, you may have had a chance to review that, which highlighted affordable housing as a big issue in the community, as will surprise absolutely no one. To use that data drawn from a statistically valid survey to frame a discussion of alpine balsam. The alpine balsam working, what do we call them, liaisons are having a joint board meeting tomorrow night. We had scheduled a report out from that experience. And so in the agenda committee, we discussed also having a staff presentation on alpine balsam, and then a different discussion for you all. that would be structured more as a roundtable down in the study session kind of approach, where you would have the opportunity to engage and wrestle with the trade-offs and the issues that have been raised in the community and through the visioning and discussion process that people have had already. As a way of deeply engaging on an individual project, a city project, a high-profile, very important city project that you will be asked most likely to give a recommendation on council to, so that you'd have the opportunity to kind of do some homework, think it through, have a discussion with each other, with the staff, so that when you do have a chance to make a recommendation, you have a basis to build off of. Also, to give a chance for this new board to really dive into something. You haven't had a chance to really roll up your sleeves in something concrete. It's not many meetings have provided that, and it's possible that later this year there will be several very meaningful, high-profile items that you will be asked to be giving recommendations on: community benefit, large lots, sub-community planning, which I think, if I remember right, Adam and Mason, when we were talking, one of the ideas was this is an opportunity to get some practice working on that, on something that when you may not have the opportunity in the future to have 2 or 3 meetings on something before you're asked to give a recommendation. Mm-hmm. The first one that you tackled right when the board was formed, ADUs, was something that you acknowledged in your sort of after-action reports, that you wanted to figure out how to do that a little better, to serve the council and the community a little better. So this is an opportunity to kind of tackle another one. Did I capture our conversation?
Yeah, with better form.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was we wanted a better process that honored everybody to be able to really be informed and kind of bounce ideas off of each other. Absolutely. Yeah.
So the bulk of that meeting, we didn't put a time on it, but judging from what else we have, would be at least an hour and 20, hour 30 minutes, where it's kind of a workshop where you get to bounce things around, ask some questions of each other, try and identify how you might want to approach a recommendation without having to actually make one, without that pressure.
Approach for recommendation. So no decision or anything needed from us, just a reminder of that's kind of the structure of this one?
I think when we were talking, the 3 of us, it was, hey, let's run this by the board and see if that's how they'd like to use the time.
Plus, by then, we could potentially have our new members, correct? Because aren't they interviewed on the 12th and decided upon, on the 19th?
That is a possibility.
Right, we thought it was a possibility. So it would also be a great opportunity to integrate potential new board members into, because we know what the trial by fire for the first ADU discussion was like, that this would be an opportunity for us to do that differently under something that we'd be giving a recommendation on. How does structuring a meeting like that feel for everybody? How about we start at that end of the table? Yeah, it's you.
Oh, I thought Crystal wanted.
No, you go first.
Good.
It feels warm and engaging with the support of council to me.
I already said.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I came
slightly
up with
deaf
this
on that.
with you.
Yeah, that's right. But I thought maybe the rest of everybody else would want to.
It's great. I'm looking forward to getting into Alpine Balsam and starting to really look at how we as a board
Can influence.
vision implementation and moving that forward. So I think it's good.
Great. Yeah, I do too. So we're all in agreement that we'll have March 20th meeting on the work plan with that. April 10th retreat.
You
And go.
guys scheduled a retreat. What do you want to do with that time?
So I recall that Corey asked us to give our ideas. Did you get a lot of ideas? No, so they were just my ideas? Okay. So I suggested that it be fairly informal, and that if possible, if there is any food, it be buffet, because there'll be new members, and so we can all sort of, seat and talk and stuff, and that if you're looking at it as 3 hours, my suggestion was that the first hour be more in-depth introductions where each person gets to talk a little bit about themselves in general and their background, since we'll be meeting some new people, but also talk about what our particular passion is for housing issues and why we're here, that sort of thing. And after one go-round, people can ask questions if they want, whatever. That the second hour be perhaps facilitated and be a SWOT analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats as we see them for the board. That would, I think, be really helpful to the new people and also help us, and that at the end of it, there would be an action plan. I think that is what I said. Let me look up. I can't remember if I said anything else. I did say what I wanted the third hour to be about. Maybe I have it here. First hour interest, second hour, oh yeah, and the third hour be about the letter, start talking about the letter that we want to send to council at the end of June when they're on break. Those are my thoughts for the content. Anybody?
I would support that idea.
The only thing that comes to my mind, because when I look at our agenda tonight and we look at D, which we've talked about already, is I think that a really valuable and important piece for this retreat would be to engage with procedures, potentially. And I haven't fully thought that through, but I just looked down that list. I think most of these are needed, and we don't have definition around them yet. And I'd really love to dedicate some time to getting into that. I'd like to use it that way.
I love the idea of, the first hour being informal in introductions and asking questions and introducing each other. I really, and I almost kind of feel like taking the facilitator and working on the operating procedures and agreements. I'm a little hesitant on SWOT only because I feel like that, I don't know, I'm open to it depending on how the facilitator handles it. And I love the idea of, because we'd be diving into operating procedures to tackle how we'd want to address a letter, our yearly and our half, would be awesome. And maybe even the letter and how we want to make recommendations moving forward too, just being clear on the recommendation piece.
Yeah, we've never sussed out the whole minority vote, majority vote type stuff, so that would be an important topic. Overall, I think there's definitely enough substance here to have a retreat, if that is a major part of the question.
And I fully support a facilitator doing bonding activities. Warm fuzzies where we get to do the trust fall or something along those lines.
I think if we could combine the trust fall with hot coals to the next level, because we're Boulder.
So the receivers stand in the hot coals waiting
For the hot fall?
to get their trust up.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think that's good.
In Boulder, it would never be
And
coal.
filmed.
It'd be hot stones.
I don't know how that comports with the green vision.
Haven't read that yet.
New Green Deal? Does it go with the New Green Deal?
I just want to throw one thing out. There's a lot, 3 hours, great. Introductions, there's a lot on there. And with the facilitator also, hopefully we can, in the lead up to this, maybe narrow it and focus it on, what we see are the most important pieces of the list that's here. somehow, if that's what we're going to do. But that would be my suggestion, is also, let's just not try to put too much in.
So maybe,
It's a great point.
yeah, so
It's
maybe.
so easy to overload it.
So maybe what Adam and I can do is help narrow it down on our next, and then in our next meeting on March 20th, come up with an agenda for it and see how everybody feels about it?
Just a suggestion, if you're having a retreat facilitator, and planning board does that, they'll often start out by asking each individual what you hope to get out of this retreat. And I just think that's really very helpful for helping to structure the retreat.
And I just wanted to add, the SWOT analysis, why I'm interested in that, it's just a way of looking at where you've been last year, what has worked really well, what you might want to change for the future, and I think that's a good idea for any organization to do on a yearly basis. Just take a look at what's working, what's not working, and what we can all do about it.
It would strike me that the SWOT analysis, it's just, an extraordinary effort to go through in a process. But mindful of Jacques' comment about that could be a 4-hour deal to do that. And especially with new people that may not have a longitudinal perspective and context of the board in the context of that, whether that would be, is it something we could commit to at another 3-hour piece? That'd be worthwhile to do.
That's an interesting perspective too, and I'm also curious, I might be answering my own question. If, because SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And honestly, I feel like our first year was kind of and we're getting our sea legs now. Yeah, it was a mulligan, totally a mulligan. Go home, mulligan. And now that we're getting our sea legs, I would really support doing something like that on our second year, and really, because then we'll have some more girth under us, and we'll have the new members, and we'll be 7, so it'll be interesting to see from that. But it might be interesting to include, so that we can create the baseline for a SWOT for next year, to create maybe a couple of goals that would help inform a SWOT for the next year. Does that make sense? Something along those lines. But, open for discussion, but something that creates the baseline that we can watch through 2019, and then in March of the next year, look over. So, possibility. Okay, so are we in agreement then that Adam, go ahead, Jeff, I see your crinkle.
I was just going to suggest that more formally perhaps than this is going, is that typically the boards will appoint, and council appoints a retreat committee or a subgroup of that solicits input, comes up with an agenda, brings it to a business meeting, discusses and approves. Is that sounds to me the direction you're heading, but I wanted to just put it out there as a way of framing it. As do you want to speak to how a planning board handles making the agenda for their retreats, and count your experience with council, if there's anything you have to support this effort of figuring out what to spend the time on?
Well, planning board, just like this board, there's some things that you do want to tackle, but we work with the retreat facilitator, and it depends. Some years it's working together, and other years it's, this last year we had Robin Bird in, who's a facilitator, or Reagan Bird, who's a facilitator on housing issues and equity issues. And then we talked about working together and working through issues that come up. And every year it seems to be a little bit of a different emphasis for the retreat. And especially when you get 2 new members.
So do you have a committee?
Excuse me, we always,
did you guys form a committee to help come up with your agenda?
on council, they always have a agenda committee for the retreat, a retreat committee. But on planning board, I can't quite recall that, but we discuss it, and then we have a facilitator, and then that person polls everybody, and then gets back and says, here's some of the things we've come up with. How does that work?
And that's what, I can't remember what her name was, that she did the,
Heidi.
Heidi. Yeah.
Yeah.
So similar to the last time. Because she reached out to everybody, right? Yeah. And then had kind of a, but it seems like too, if our first year is a mulligan, definitely focusing operations, agreements, the recommendation and the letter format. It seems like we're all in agreement on definitely nailing those down.
I agree with all that, but I also did just want to add, I can't help it, if we feel, or if many people, some people feel that the first year was a mulligan, it really might be good to spend a little time talking about why people think that and what can be different. Yeah.
I mean, I just kind of thought, I haven't been through a SWAT, or at least if I have, it's been a long time.
You would know.
But my feeling was hearing potentially the length and the depth, especially with new members coming on, and what this might be like. I mean, I do wonder if we can leave this to the facilitator of just saying, is there a way to do a mini SWAT? Is there a way to do this in a manner that will be time sensitive and, potentially will also engage with some of the pieces that we might be choosing to work on simultaneously. So, because I think it is valuable.
Do we feel clear on this P? Go ahead, Michael. You feel like you had something to add? I can feel all sorts of energy coming off of you.
I was just going to say, from an equity perspective, with an Irish heritage, mulligan is a little sensitive.
Excuse me.
It's like a big waste of time.
I enter my formal apologies to the Irish.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing, Jeff, is that we will contact a facilitator for it, and that she could reach out to everyone, and with also kind of a general understanding that we are interested in generally introductions, the operation, procedures, and agreements, and then help structuring our letter and recommendation formats, and then kind of querying everybody about maybe strengths, a mini or some form of a baseline for next year to really look back and reflect on and measure. And then?
Just clarification, when you say letter and recommendation format, to me, that process was the other word that came to mind. Is that really what how you come up with your recommendations in your letter?
Yeah, I'd say it's a process.
Not what you come up with, but how you come up with it?
Right. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Does that feel true for everybody? It does. Okay. Not saying you nod, Judy, yeah?
Fine.
Okay. Okay, and then the number 5D is being taken care of. So we'll move into matters from the staff.
Well, let me start with a few quick updates. The manufactured housing strategy that you considered went to council. Hopefully we incorporated your feedback in a way that you recognize. If it's something you're interested in, if you haven't seen it, there's the memo that went, which was somewhat different than what you got, in part thanks to your input. And then you can always watch the overview, watch the discussion in the study session. In essence, the conclusion was to move forward with develop 5 significant work items for prioritization. Those were pad rent stabilization, infrastructure options, manufactured housing community licensing being of a slightly higher priority than looking at the land use current code and zone for mobile home communities, and then energy efficiency was the 5th area, as well as a list of several items that didn't rise to the level of work plan items but could just move forward. So that's the quick takeaway from that. The request has been for that it go back to council in July, so it will come back to you either in May or in June at this point. As was mentioned, council is in the midst of its annual appointments. I just wanted to point out two things. One is that with the addition of 2 new members, expansion of the board, so there will be 3 openings, as you know. There will be 2 people appointed to 5-year terms and 1 person appointed to a 3-year term to ensure that there aren't a multiple or more than 2 at any one time rotating off the board. I will send, or Corey will send, one of us will send you an email just asking for your thoughts on what would be most useful, what we did for you to onboard you and orient you. Some of it was probably more useful than other things. So if you could give us your thoughts, we'd appreciate it as we think about how to best support the new members. So watch for that coming in the next couple days, and if you could give us, or think back as to what you found most useful, we would find that very helpful. So then the other thing we had on the staff, matters from staff, was taking a look at the work plan. As I think it was Judy, you had asked about it, and we were like, yeah, it's been a while since we put it out there. And then, as I mentioned to you, in large part, it's challenging because many of the projects that council's considering that involve housing issues don't have concrete schedules at the moment. And so it's possible you'll get a crunch of several significant items all at once. The other thing that is a little unclear is at council's study session about the HAB, they said, well, we need to define the questions we want HAB to answer on these projects, and they have not done that yet. So neither the timing nor the specific questions are known, which is part of the reason this has been a bit of a challenge. With that said, we've got the next 3 meetings, including the retreat, roughly blocked out with the question of April 24th at this point to be determined. So I don't know if there are questions about what's sketched out there. We covered the 20th. There are a couple items on there that didn't fit into that overall roundtable discussion, project-based discussion, the public engagement approaches and framework. Adam, I don't know if you want to speak to that. And we've added the retreat agenda approval. There's a third item which I'll mention, which is we would like to know if you want an update on the plans for the city-owned property at 30th and Pearl. That project's moving forward. We can bring you an update either in March or April.
Yes, please.
I'm seeing, okay, we will plan on that and work with the agenda committee to get that scheduled.
Awesome.
Just real quick on the public engagement approaches and framework, I think we covered that, or will be continuing to cover that under the operating procedures and agreements.
Okay.
I have a question, Jeff.
Yeah.
I was a little confused, when you mentioned that council had said there's certain things they want to decide, what particular questions they want HAB to answer. I am concerned, I guess, that in their crush of so many things that they have to do, that will be forgotten. Can staff do something to ask them about, so we were told this and we're anxious to participate in all these areas, what are the questions?
I have brought it up with some of the project managers. I think, as you pointed out, the crush of work and intensity of their effort that they're making, it probably will lead to the standard approach, which is boards are asked the same questions that will be moving forward to council. So I suspect as these project moves forward, what you'll see is a request for your thoughts on the items that staff is asking for input on.
So you feel comfortable about it, that it'll just naturally sort of work out?
I think it'll work itself out,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
I would like to offer a suggestion, too. I know, Michael, you didn't participate, and I don't know if I recall or not, but one of the things that we did when we very first formed as a board is we all met for beers on a social hour, and I think that once the appointments are made, it would be awesome to schedule that again and have us just meet for beers. So I just want to put that out there because I thought it was, when we were talking about the onboarding piece of it, it was one of the things that I found kind of cool, was just meeting up and socializing.
Should we notice it?
No, as long as
not
we don't
only-
talk about business, we were, Aaron told us, because when I was like, we should all go out for beers. Aaron said, as long as we don't talk about business, we can have beers. So yeah, just wanted to bring that out there. Is there anything else from staff?
Corey, did you have anything else? No, that's our
Okay.
list.
So let's spend a few minutes debriefing. That was kind of an intense meeting. Does anybody want to kind of just debrief and?
I just had one question. I know we voted to table the discussion of the Affordable Housing Experience meeting, and it was tabled, but we didn't actually vote on dispensing with D. And I know I sent Crystal a note and said, does the planning board end their meetings at a certain time? And she said they have an aspirational time, but if it takes longer, it takes longer. And I know that different boards have different ways of operating about that, but since we cut down our meetings from 2 a month to 1 a month, I'm starting to have a concern about getting things done. We've already tabled this. We already have things we're going to be talking about at the next meeting. And not only are we going to be talking about D, but we're going to be having to talk about the whole affordable housing experience. And I just am personally concerned about that we're just kicking the can down the road.
So I hear 3 things from you. One, wanting or desiring a longer discussion around our time sensitivity. I'm hearing you question whether or not we've actually formally dispensed D and what we did with it. And then you also brought up one other thing, and I was trying to remember what it was, but we can start there with those two. So you seem like you want to talk a little bit more about the sensitivity of time. So does anybody else have thoughts around time?
I think that fits pretty well under HAB operating procedures and agreements for a discussion, if we do not want to have that discussion here at the end of our meeting.
Great point. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything then? I think it's a great point about adding this to operation agreements.
Because I have many thoughts on that as well.
Okay.
Can I just clarify something Judy said? Planning board does not list times, but some boards have aspirational times. Open space, when I was on it, had them, and we always went over mainly because it was the director and his reports. But that's not your problem, Jeff. You're very concise. That was our little joke on open space.
I find fixed times appealing. I find they create a sense of urgency to get to the point if you have one, and a sense of preparation to get through the agenda in the allotted time and peace, with the understanding that sometimes you can go over. With what other boards do is I'm respectful but somewhat indifferent to. I think we have to decide what's right for us.
Right, yep. So we can expand this conversation during our retreat.
That answers your second part.
Yeah.
By the way, we had moved that to the retreat.
Yes.
5D.
So 5D was when we talked about, does it, and remember I asked you, I said, are you okay with that? And you said, I'm fine. That was the dispensing of D over to the retreat.
That's probably why I was slow to answer, because I just didn't want to create another wave, but okay.
I mean, just to put my 2 cents in on this one right now, I think I agree in general with having set times, because I do think it does exactly what Mike's saying, and I think that's important for us to work on being concise in what we're trying to deliver, what we're trying to get accomplished, and bring it to the table in a clean package. The other piece is, I mean, you know, if we were to, part of me says, I would be open to saying, do we want to have a motion to extend the meeting type of situation? But I'd want a fixed time where we have the opportunity to have a motion to extend a meeting if we feel it's necessary. And we could approach that here if we wanted to around these items, but.
Again, I think we can dive into this because I know Adam's got thoughts on it, I have thoughts on it, but we'll dive into the details on that. as an item at the retreat so that we can get clear and have agreement on something as far as the time, and then everybody feels like they can share. Is there anything else anybody would want to debrief about the calendar or the meeting?
Yeah, I just want to say my biggest takeaway, for sure, and something Mike said really got me, was what level of preparation we should be seeking when we're trying to decide on things. And that made a lot of sense to me, because where our discussion devolved is when we didn't have a lot of clarity around what we were talking about. So we just have to be more willing to come to the table with specifics and willing to just call for votes on things. And if they don't work out, they don't work out. That's fine. There's always a room for a friendly amendment here and there. But that's where our biggest problem still lies, is trying to define maybe a much bigger problem than a single issue all at the same time. So if we can get more concise about what we're trying to specifically answer, that should solve a whole lot of that away.
I'd add to that, right after we kind of closed that portion of the meeting and chose to table it, I started thinking about the process and how it was presented, and a part of me was curious, had we not gotten into the letters first and we had heard your plan, I'm curious if that process would have felt different. So like if you would have come out with, this is the plan, this is what our ideas are, and here are the letters attached to it. So I found that I was thinking about process again. And again, being a new board, these things are new to all of us. And some of these, although I could sense your frustration in this, and I think it was frustrating for all of us, because like Michael had said, there was heart there, and we were all wanted to move forward on it, but it was so fuzzy and unclear. So as we move forward on these and create clarity in our process of how we're doing it, I think we'll get much better at these things. But I also think that's probably one of our, if we're going to go down the SWOT line, one of our strengths is our ability to still find some humor in it afterwards, decompress a little bit, and know that, yes, it was a frustrating process, but that we'll get there. We'll get there. And it is important, and you matter.
Oh, thanks.
So do you, Judy. The engagement team matters.
And nobody's opposed and nobody said no.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing, I think, sometimes, if we would have just gone into, tabling gives us a moment to breathe on it. And I think it's the first time we've tabled something, isn't it? We haven't, I don't feel like we've tabled anything else. Yeah, you've got a few tables in there? Yeah. But it feels okay to, if we literally spent almost 2 hours on it. I think we were at a point where we had to tap out or drowned.
That's why I voted for it.
Yeah.
My piece on that is just, I think that's what caused the fuzziness for me, was that the order that it was brought to us didn't work. We were kind of deciding on the end piece before we had talked about the first part. So just a lesson for me in that was like, okay, if I'm going to bring something, that is very important, how I structure it, the presentation of it.
And what's kind of interesting is we got a little bit sloppy there. Remember how for a little while that we were very poignant about bringing the motion? Like we wrote the motion so that we would have the clarity before we moved into anything. And even though it felt very formal to us, it lent us to be prepared. It required us to be prepared and clear about it in advance. Even if we didn't use the motion, it required us to be prepared and clear. And we slid away from that.
We will have motions, won't we, Adam?
Yes.
Well, let's not use them as a weapon, but I'm saying that, it just helps with clarity and preparation.
But it's a complex, the engagement's a complex undertaking. It's not simple. And then trying to, in a sense, oversimplify it by applying a template of parliamentary procedure in Robert's Rules of Orders is sort of almost, you feel, if you're the one doing it, you probably feel like there's a certain sense of compromise to get to this, to make it so narrow to fit within that context of that motion. It's not a trivial thing to accomplish, because you didn't have a specific board mandate on the engagement to begin with, so it didn't have the privilege of that character. or I mean, of that clarity. They didn't have the privilege of that clarity along the way. It's kind of challenging by its definition.
I'd also, this is just a really minor thing, but Corey, is it okay, or Jeff, is it okay, all the things that you did that we voted on where we changed wording here and there, can you send that to Adam and me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is there anything else from anybody?
I do have something. So I am going off planning board. It's the end of my 6th year this next month, and so I will no longer be your liaison to the housing board, but it's been...
When's your last time? Tonight?
This might be it.
Actually, our last planning board meeting was a week or 2 ago.
Oh,
Yeah. So we have, sometimes you have breaks in your schedule. But I just wanted to say it's interesting to see how the board is growing, and I'm very excited for the things on your work plan. Alpine Balsam, sub-community planning, community benefit. Don't neglect the use tables. I know it's not the exciting thing. And any of you can call me if you want a little overview of those items. But I see it as a big opportunity for you all to be real advocates for housing. And my bias, or my interest, is permanently affordable housing. But for a whole variety of income levels. First, we used to talk about that with just the lower to middle income of the average medium income, but now that top is rising. So I hope to hear some great ideas from you all on Alpine Balsam, and I'll watch on TV to see what ideas you have for that. But if you should be the advocates, because other people besides the providers and this wonderful staff are the other ones in the community, so.
well, thank
I
you
look
for
forward
your
to that.
service on planning board and for here.
Well, you're welcome. And I just want to say, what a wonderful staff. Corey and Jeff, you've been just stellar. And will you tell the rest of the staff, because you have, one of the funnest things has been hearing in depth all the programs that, that housing is involved in. So I've appreciated that part
Great.
of the learning.
Thank you.
Did they pay you?
And on that note,
Liaison.
I want to say one more thing,
oh, yeah, Adam.
just because there is a chance that this might be my
No.
last meeting too. So.
Even Jeff said, only 2 new people.
Yeah, but, well, Jeff doesn't get a vote in this situation, so I
Jeff
don't
already
take his
3 or 4 is probably, given the Crystal situation. Maybe we can persuade a TRG member to join you, so.
But if this is in fact for any reason the last time, we get to meet.
Perish the thought.
I really appreciate the time with you guys, and I love that it's been rocky along the way sometimes too, because that gives me more appreciation for the times that we do really work well together, and how much more fluid things have gotten over time. So, this has been awesome. I really hope to be back, and we'll see how things pan out. But
I'm in complete denial about this, by the way. It's not even this whole changeover thing, and I've really enjoyed working with you. And I truly hope it continues, because you're super thoughtful, very passionate, and a strong communicator. So that's what I feel like we all want for board members. So, if anybody's listening, you will be one of my recommendations.
thank you.
Yeah. You got my vote.
Jeff, would, in our bylaws, do we have the authority to make a motion to extend Adam's term?
Yeah.
No. Pretty clear.
Can we usurp counsel on that one?
I've never seen you be so specific. Kind of enlightening and refreshing.
On the wrong side of the line. Yes.
So you know, Adam, where I stand. I'm willing to try that.
Thanks, man.
Okay. And I don't have to make a motion to adjourn, do I? I always forget that.
It's your gavel.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Adam will second that, and on that, we will adjourn. Oh, man.
Live from Paris, on France 24.